The Enchanted Canary. Once upon a time, in the reign of King Cambrinus, there lived at Avesnes one of his lords, who was the finest man, by which I mean the fattest, in the whole country of Flanders. He ate 4 meals a day, slept 12 hours out of the 24, and the only thing he ever did was to shoot at small birds with his bow and arrow. Still, with all his practice, he shot very badly. He was so fat and heavy, and as he grew daily fatter, he was at last obliged to give up walking and be dragged about in a wheelchair, and the people made fun of him and gave him the name of my Lord Tubby. Now, the only trouble that Lord Tubby had was about his son, whom he loved very much, although they were not in the least alike, for the young prince was as thin as a cuckoo. And what vexed him more than all was that though the young ladies throughout all his lands did their best to make the prince fall in love with them, he would have nothing to say to any of them, and told his father he did not wish to marry. Instead of chatting with them in the dusk, he wandered about the woods, whispering to the moon. No wonder the young ladies thought him very odd, but they liked him all the better for that, and as he had received at his birth the name of Desire, they all called him d'Amour Désir. "What is the matter with you?" his father often said to him. "You have everything you can possibly wish for, a good bed, good food, and tons full of beer. The only thing you want, in order to become as fat as a pig, is a wife that can bring you broad, rich lands. So marry, and you will be perfectly happy." "I ask nothing better than to marry," replied Desire, "but I have never seen a woman that pleases me. All the girls here are pink and white, and I am tired to death of their eternal lily and roses." "My faith!" cried Tubby, "do you want to marry a negress, and give me grandchildren as ugly as monkeys and as stupid as owls?" "No, father, nothing of the sort. But there must be women somewhere in the world who are neither pink nor white, and I tell you once for all that I will never marry until I have found one exactly to my taste." Some time afterwards, it happened that the prior of the Abbey of St. Amand sent to the Lord of Avesnes a basket of oranges with a beautifully written letter saying that these golden fruit, then unknown in Flanders, came straight from a land where the sun always shone. That evening, Tubby and his son ate the golden apples at supper and thought them delicious. Next morning, as the day dawned, Desire went down to the stable and saddled his pretty white horse. Then he went, all dressed for a journey, to the bedside of Tubby, and found him smoking his first pipe. "Father," he said gravely, "I have come to bid you farewell. Last night I dreamed that I was walking in a wood, where the trees were covered with golden apples. I gathered one of them, and when I opened it, there came out a lovely princess with a golden skin. That is the wife I want, and I am going to look for her." The Lord of Avesnes was so much astonished that he let his pipe fall to the ground. Then he became so diverted at the notion of his son marrying a yellow woman, and a woman shut up inside an orange, that he burst into fits of laughter. Desire waited to bid him good-bye until he was quiet again. But as his father went on laughing and showed no signs of stopping, the young man took his hand, kissed it tenderly, opened the door, and in the twinkling of an eye was as at the bottom of the staircase. He jumped lightly on his horse, and was a mile from home before Tubby had ceased laughing. "A yellow wife! He must be mad, fit for a strait waistcoat," cried the good man, when he was able to speak. "Here, quick, bring him back to me." The servants mounted their horses and rode after the prince, but as they did not know which road he had taken, they went all ways except the right one, and instead of bringing him back, they returned themselves when it grew dark, with their horses worn out and covered with dust. When Desire thought they could no longer catch him, he pulled his horse into a walk, like a prudent man who knows he has far to go. He travelled in this way for many weeks, passing by villages, towns, mountains, valleys and plains, but always pushing south, where every day the sun seemed hotter and more brilliant. At last, one day at sunset, Desire felt the sun so warm that he thought he must now be near the place of his dream. He was at that moment close to the corner of a wood where stood a little hut, before the door of which his horse stopped of his own accord. An old man with a white beard was sitting on the doorstep enjoying the fresh air. The prince got down from his horse and asked leave to rest. "Come in, my young friend," said the old man. "My house is not large, but it is big enough to hold a stranger." The traveller entered, and his host put before him a simple meal. When his hunger was satisfied, the old man said to him, "If I do not mistake, you come from far. May I ask where you are going?" "I will tell you," answered Desire, "though most likely you will laugh at me. I dreamed that in the land of the sun there was a wood full of orange trees, and that in one of the oranges I should find a beautiful princess who is to be my wife. It is she I am seeking." "Why should I laugh?" asked the old man. "Madness in youth is true wisdom. Go, young man, follow your dream, and if you do not find the happiness that you seek, at any rate you will have had the happiness of seeking it." The next day the prince arose early and took leave of his host. "The wood that you saw in your dream is not far from here," said the old man. "It is in the depth of the forest, and this road will lead you there. You will come to a vast park surrounded by high walls. In the middle of the park is a castle, where dwells a horrible witch who allows no living being to enter the doors. Behind the castle is the orange grove. Follow the wall till you come to a heavy iron gate. Don't try to press it open, but oil the hinges with this," and the old man gave him a small bottle. "The gate will open of itself," he continued, "and a huge dog, which guards the castle, will come to you with his mouth wide open, but just throw him this oat cake. Next, you will see a baking woman leaning over her heated oven. Give her this brush. Lastly, you will find a well on your left. Do not forget to take the cord of the bucket and spread it in the sun. When you have done this, do not enter the castle, but go round it and enter the orange grove. Then gather 3 oranges and get back to the gate as fast as you can. Once out of the gate, leave the forest by the opposite side. Now attend to this. Whatever happens, do not open your oranges till you reach the bank of a river or a fountain. Out of each orange will come a princess, and you can choose which you like for your wife. Your choice once made, be very careful never to leave your bride for an instant, and remember that the danger which is most to be feared is never the danger we are most afraid of." Desire thanked his host warmly and took the road he pointed out. In less than an hour, he arrived at the wall, which was very high indeed. He sprang to the ground, fastened his horse to a tree, and soon found the iron gate. Then he took out his bottle and oiled the hinges, when the gate opened of itself, and he saw an old castle standing inside. The prince entered boldly into the courtyard. Suddenly he heard fierce howls, and a dog as tall as a donkey, with eyes like billiard balls, came towards him, showing his teeth, which were like the prongs of a fork. Desire flung him the oatcake, which the great dog instantly snapped up, and the young prince passed quietly on. A few yards further he saw a huge oven, with a wide, red-hot, gaping mouth. A woman as tall as a giant was leaning over the oven. Desire gave her the brush, which she took in silence. Then he went on to the well, drew up the cord, which was half rotten, and stretched it out in the sun. Lastly, he went round the castle and plunged into the orange grove. There he gathered the 3 most beautiful oranges he could find and turned to go back to the gate. But just at this moment the sun was darkened, the earth trembled, and Desire heard a voice crying, "Baker, baker, take him by his feet and throw him into the oven." "No," replied the baker. "A long time has passed since I first began to scour this oven with my own flesh. You never cared to give me a brush, but he has given me one, and he shall go in peace." "Rope, oh rope!" cried the voice again. "Twine yourself round his neck and strangle him." "No," replied the rope. "You have left me for many years past to fall to pieces with the damp. He has stretched me out in the sun. Let him go in peace." "Dog, my good dog," cried the voice, more and more angry, "jump at his throat and eat him up." "No," replied the dog, "though I have served you long. You never gave me any bread. He has given me as much as I want. Let him go in peace." "Iron gate, cried the voice, growling like thunder. "Fall on him and grind him to powder." "No," replied the gate. "It is 100 years since you left me to rust, and he has oiled me. Let him go in peace." Once outside, the young adventurer put his oranges into a bag that hung from his saddle, mounted his horse, and rode quickly out of the forest. Now, as he was longing to see the princesses, he was very anxious to come to a river or a fountain. But, though he rode for hours, a river or fountain was nowhere to be seen. Still, his heart was light, for he felt that he had got through the most difficult part of his task, and the rest was easy. About midday he reached a sandy plain, scorching in the sun. Here he was seized with dreadful thirst. He took his gourd and raised it to his lips. But the gourd was empty. In the excitement of his joy, he had forgotten to fill it. He rode on, struggling with his sufferings, but at last he could bear it no longer. He let himself slide to the earth and lay down beside his horse, his throat burning, his chest heaving, and his head going round. Already he felt that death was near him, when his eyes fell on the bag where the oranges peeped out. Poor Desire, who had braved so many dangers to win the lady of his dreams, would have given at this moment all the princesses in the world, were they pink or golden, for a single drop of water. "Ah," he said to himself, "if only these oranges were real fruit, fruit as refreshing as what I ate in Flanders. And after all, who knows?" This idea put some life into him. He had the strength to lift himself up and put his hand into his bag. He drew out an orange and opened it with his knife. Out of it flew the prettiest little female canary that ever was seen. "Give me something to drink." "I am dying of thirst," said the golden bird. "Wait a minute," replied Désir, so much astonished that he forgot his own sufferings. And, to satisfy the bird, he took a second orange and opened it without thinking what he was doing. Out of it flew another canary, and she too began to cry, "I am dying of thirst. Give me something to drink." Then Tubby's son saw his folly, and while the 2 canaries flew away, he sank on the ground where, exhausted by his last effort, he lay unconscious. When he came to himself, he had a pleasant feeling of freshness all about him. It was night. The sky was sparkling with stars, and the earth was covered with a heavy dew. The traveller, having recovered, mounted his horse, and at the first streak of dawn he saw a stream dancing in front of him, and stooped down and drank his fill. He hardly had courage to open his last orange. Then he remembered that the night before he had disobeyed the orders of the old man. Perhaps his terrible thirst was a trick of the cunning witch, and suppose, even though he opened the orange on the banks of the stream, that he did not find in it the princess that he sought, he took his knife and cut it open. Alas, out of it flew a little canary, just like the others, who cried, "I am thirsty! Give me something to drink!" Great was the disappointment of Desire. However, he was determined not to let this bird fly away. So he took up some water in the palm of his hand and held it to its beak. Scarcely had the canary drunk when she became a beautiful girl, tall and straight as a poplar tree, with black eyes and a golden skin. Desire had never seen anyone half so lovely, and he stood gazing at her in delight. On her side she seemed quite bewildered, but she looked about her with happy eyes and was not at all afraid of her deliverer. He asked her name. She answered that she was called the Princess Zizi. She was about 16 years old, and for 10 years of that time the witch had kept her shut up in an orange in the shape of a canary. "Well then, my charming Zizi," said the young prince, who was longing to marry her, "let us ride away quickly, so as to escape from the wicked witch." But Zizi wished to know where he meant to take her. "To my father's castle," he said. He mounted his horse and took her in front of him, and, holding her carefully in his arms, they began their journey. Everything the princess saw was new to her, and in passing through mountains, valleys, and towns, she asked 1,000 questions. Desire was charmed to answer them. "It is so delightful to teach those one loves." Once she inquired what the girls in his country were like. "They are pink and white," he replied, "and their eyes are blue." "Do you like blue eyes?" said the princess. But Desire thought it was a good opportunity to find out what was in her heart, so he did not answer. "And no doubt," went on the princess, "one of them is your intended bride?" Still he was silent, and Zizi drew herself up proudly. "No," he said at last, "none of the girls of my own country are beautiful in my eyes, and that is why I came to look for a wife in the land of the sun. Was I wrong, my lovely Zizi?" This time it was Zizi's turn to be silent. Talking in this way, they drew near to the castle. When they were about 4 stone throws from the gates, they dismounted in the forest by the edge of a fountain. "My dear Zizi," said Tubby's son, "we cannot present ourselves before my father like 2 common people who have come back from a walk. We must enter the castle with more ceremony. Wait for me here, and in an hour I will return with carriages and horses fit for a princess." "Don't be long," replied Zizi, and she watched him go with wistful eyes. When she was left by herself, the poor girl began to feel afraid. She was alone for the first time in her life and in the middle of a thick forest. Suddenly she heard a noise among the trees. Fearing lest it should be a wolf, she hid herself in the hollow trunk of a willow tree which hung over the fountain. It was big enough to hold her altogether, but she peeped out, and her pretty head was reflected in the clear water. Then there appeared, not a wolf, but a creature quite as wicked and quite as ugly. Let us see who this creature was. Not far from the fountain there lived a family of bricklayers. Now, 15 years before this time, the father in walking through the forest found a little girl who had been deserted by the gypsies. He carried her home to his wife, and the good woman was sorry for her, and brought her up with her own sons. As she grew older, the little gypsy became much more remarkable for strength and cunning than for sense or beauty. She had a low forehead, a flat nose, thick lips, coarse hair, and a skin not golden like that of Zizi, but the colour of clay. As she was always being teased about her complexion, she got as noisy and cross as a titmouse. So they used to call her Titty. Titty was often sent by the bricklayer to fetch water from the fountain, and as she was very proud and lazy, the gypsy disliked this very much. It was she who had frightened Zizi by appearing with her pitcher on her shoulder. Just as she was stooping to fill it, she saw reflected in the water the lovely image of the princess. "What a pretty face!" she exclaimed. "Why, it must be mine! How in the world can they call me ugly? I am certainly much too pretty to be their water carrier." So saying, she broke her pitcher and went home. "Where is your pitcher?" asked the bricklayer. "Well, what do you expect? The pitcher may go many times to the well, but at last it is broken. Well, here is a bucket that will not break." The gypsy returned to the fountain, and addressing once more the image of Zizi, she said, "No, I don't mean to be a beast of burden any longer." And she flung the bucket so high in the air that it stuck in the branches of an oak. "I met a wolf," she told the bricklayer, "and I broke the bucket across his nose." The bricklayer asked her no more questions, but took down a broom and gave her such a beating that her pride was humbled a little. Then he handed to her an old copper milk can and said, "If you don't bring it back full, your bones shall suffer for it." Titty went off rubbing her sides, but this time she did not dare to disobey, and in a very bad temper stooped down over the well. It was not at all easy to fill the milk can, which was large and round. It would not go down into the well, and the gypsy had to try again and again. At last her arms grew so tired that when she did manage to get the can properly under the water, she had no strength to pull it up, and it rolled to the bottom. On seeing the can disappear, she made such a miserable face that Zizi, who had been watching her all this time, burst into fits of laughter. Titty turned round and perceived the mistake she had made, and she felt so angry that she made up her mind to be revenged at once. "What are you doing there?" "You lovely creature," she said to Zizi. "I am waiting for my lover," Zizi replied, and then, with a simplicity quite natural in a girl who so lately had been a canary, she told all her story. The gypsy had often seen the young prince pass by, with his gun on his shoulder, when he was going after crows. She was too ugly and ragged for him ever to have noticed her. But Titty on her side had admired him, though she thought he might well have been a little fatter. "Dear, dear," she said to herself, "so he likes yellow women. Why, I am yellow too, and if I could only think of a way." It was not long before she did think of it. "What?" cried the sly Titty. "They are coming with great pomp to fetch you, and you are not afraid to show yourself to so many fine lords and ladies with your hair down like that. Get down at once, my poor child, and let me dress your hair for you." The innocent Zizi came down at once and stood by Titty. The gypsy began to comb her long brown locks, when suddenly she drew a pin from her stays, and, just as the titmouse digs its beak into the heads of linnets and larks, Titty dug the pin into the head of Zizi. No sooner did Zizi feel the prick of the pin than she became a bird again, and, spreading her wings, she flew away. "That was neatly done," said the gypsy. "The prince will be clever if he finds his bride." And, arranging her dress, she seated herself on the grass to await desire. Meanwhile, the prince was coming as fast as his horse could carry him. He was so impatient that he was always full 50 yards in front of the lords and ladies sent by Tubby to bring back Zizi. At the sight of the hideous gypsy, he was struck dumb with surprise and horror. "Ah me," said Titty, "so you don't know your poor Zizi. While you were away, the wicked witch came and turned me into this. But if you only have the courage to marry me, I shall get back my beauty." And she began to cry bitterly. Now, the good-natured Desire was as soft-hearted as he was brave. "Poor girl," he thought to himself. "It is not her fault, after all, that she has grown so ugly. It is mine. Oh, why did I not follow the old man's advice? Why did I leave her alone? And besides, it depends on me to break the spell, and I love her too much to let her remain like this. So he presented the gypsy to the lords and ladies of the court, explaining to them the terrible misfortune which had befallen his beautiful bride. They all pretended to believe it, and the ladies at once put on the false princess, the rich dresses they had brought for Zizi. She was then perched on the top of a magnificent ambling palfrey, and they set forth to the castle. But unluckily, the rich dress and jewels only made Titty look uglier still, and Desire could not help feeling hot and uncomfortable when he made his entry with her into the city. Bells were pealing, chimes ringing, and the people filling the streets and standing at their doors to watch the procession go by, and they could hardly believe their eyes as they saw what a strange bride their prince had chosen. In order to do her more honor, Tubby came to meet her at the foot of the great marble staircase. At the sight of the hideous creature, he almost fell backwards. "What?" he cried. "Is this the wonderful beauty?" "Yes, father, it is she," replied Desire with a sheepish look. "But she has been bewitched by a wicked sorceress, and will not regain her beauty until she is my wife."
"Does she say so?"
"Well, if you believe that, you may drink cold water and think it bacon," the unhappy Tubby answered crossly. But all the same, as he adored his son, he gave the gypsy his hand and led her to the great hall where the bridal feast was spread. The feast was excellent, but Desire hardly touched anything. However, to make up, the other guests ate greedily, and, as for Tubby, nothing ever took away his appetite. When the moment arrived to serve the roast goose, there was a pause, and Tubby took the opportunity to lay down his knife and fork for a little. But, as the goose gave no sign of appearing, he sent his head carver to find out what was the matter in the kitchen. Now, this was what had happened. While the goose was turning on the spit, a beautiful little canary hopped onto the sill of the open window. "Good morning, my fine cook," she said in a silvery voice to the man who was watching the roast. "Good morning, lovely golden bird," replied the chief of the scullions, who had been well brought up. "I pray that heaven may send you to sleep," said the golden bird, "and that the goose may burn, so that there may be none left for Titty." And instantly the chief of the scullions fell fast asleep, and the goose was burnt to a cinder. When he awoke, he was horrified, and gave orders to pluck another goose, to stuff it with chestnuts, and put it on the spit. While it was browning at the fire, Tubby inquired for his goose a second time. The master cook himself mounted to the hall to make his excuses, and to beg his lord to have a little patience. Tubby showed his patience by abusing his son. "As if it wasn't enough," he grumbled between his teeth, "that the boy should pick up a hag without a penny. But the goose must go and burn now. It isn't a wife he has brought me, it is Famine herself." While the master cook was upstairs, the golden bird came again to perch on the window-sill, and called in his clear voice to the head scullion, who was watching the spit. "Good morning, my fine scullion." "Good morning, lovely golden bird," replied the scullion, whom the master cook had forgotten in his excitement to warn. "I pray heaven," went on the canary, "that it will send you to sleep, and that the goose may burn, so that there may be none left for Titty." And the scullion fell fast asleep, and when the master cook came back, he found the goose as black as the chimney. In a fury he woke the scullion, who, in order to save himself from blame, told the whole story. "That accursed bird," said the cook. "It will end by getting me sent away. Come, some of you, and hide yourselves, and if it comes again, catch it and wring its neck." He spitted a third goose, lit a huge fire, and seated himself by it. The bird appeared a third time and said, "Good morning, my fine cook." "Good morning, lovely golden bird," replied the cook, as if nothing had happened, and at the moment that the canary was beginning, "I pray heaven that it may send." A scullion who was hidden outside rushed out and shut the shutters. The bird flew into the kitchen. Then all the cooks and scullions sprang after it, knocking at it with their aprons. At length, one of them caught it just at the very moment that Tubby entered the kitchen, waving his sceptre. He had come to see for himself why the goose had never made its appearance. The scullion stopped at once, just as he was about to wring the canary's neck. "Will someone be kind enough to tell me the meaning of all this?" cried the Lord of Avesnes. "Your Excellency, it is the bird," replied the scullion, and he placed it in his hand. "Nonsense, what a lovely bird," said Tubby, and in stroking its head, he touched a pin that was sticking between its feathers. He pulled it out, and lo! The canary at once became a beautiful girl with a golden skin who jumped lightly to the ground. "Gracious, what a pretty girl," said Tubby. "Father, it is she. It is Zizi," exclaimed Desire, who entered at this moment, and he took her in his arms, crying, "My darling Zizi, how happy I am to see you once more." "Well, and the other one?" asked Tubby. The other one was stealing quietly to the door. "Stop her," called Tubby. "We will judge her cause at once." And he seated himself solemnly on the oven and condemned Titty to be burned alive. After which the lords and cooks formed themselves in lines, and Tubby betrothed Desire to Zizi. The marriage took place a few days later. All the boys in the countryside were there, armed with wooden swords and decorated with epaulets made of gilt paper. Zizi obtained Titty's pardon, and she was sent back to the brick fields, followed and hooted at by all the boys. And this is why today the country boys always throw stones at a titmouse. On the evening of the wedding day, all the larders, cellars, cupboards, and tables of the people, whether rich or poor, were loaded as if by enchantment with bread, wine, beer, cakes and tarts, roast larks, and even geese, so that Tubby could not complain any more that his son had married Famine. Since that time there has always been plenty to eat in that country, and since that time too, you see in the midst of the fair-haired, blue-eyed women of Flanders a few beautiful girls whose eyes are black and whose skins are the colour of gold. They are the descendants of Zizi. The Enchanted Pig. Once upon a time there lived a king who had 3 daughters. Now it happened that he had to go out to battle, so he called his daughters and said to them, "My dear children, I am obliged to go to the wars. The enemy is approaching us with a large army. It is a great grief to me to leave you all. During my absence, take care of yourselves and be good girls. Behave well and look after everything in the house. You may walk in the garden, and you may go into all the rooms in the palace, except the room at the back in the right-hand corner. Into that you must not enter, for harm would befall you." "You may keep your mind easy, father," they replied. "We have never been disobedient to you. Go in peace, and may heaven give you a glorious victory." When everything was ready for his departure, the king gave them the keys of all the rooms and reminded them once more of what he had said. His daughters kissed his hands with tears in their eyes and wished him prosperity, and he gave the eldest the keys. Now, when the girls found themselves alone, they felt so sad and dull that they did not know what to do. So, to pass the time, they decided to work for part of the day, to read for part of the day, and to enjoy themselves in the garden for part of the day. As long as they did, this all went well with them. But this happy state of things did not last long. Every day they grew more and more curious, and you will see what the end of that was. "Sisters," said the eldest princess, "all day long we sew, spin, and read. We have been several days quite alone, and there is no corner of the garden that we have not explored. We have been in all the rooms of our father's palace, and have admired the rich and beautiful furniture, why should not we go into the room that our father forbade us to enter?" "Sister," said the youngest, "I cannot think how you can tempt us to break our father's command. When he told us not to go into that room, he must have known what he was saying, and have had a good reason for saying it." "Surely the sky won't fall about our heads if we do go in," said the second princess. "Dragons and such like monsters that would devour us will not be hidden in the room. And how will our father ever find out that we have gone in?" While they were speaking thus, encouraging each other, they had reached the room. The eldest fitted the key into the lock, and snap! The door stood open. The three girls entered. And what do you think they saw? The room was quite empty, and without any ornament, but in the middle stood a large table with a gorgeous cloth, and on it lay a big open book. Now the princesses were curious to know what was written in the book, especially the eldest, and this is what she read. "The eldest daughter of this king will marry a prince from the east." Then the second girl stepped forward, and turning over the page she read, "The second daughter of this king will marry a prince from the west." The girls were delighted and laughed and teased each other, but the youngest princess did not want to go near the table or to open the book. Her elder sisters, however, left her no peace. And will she, no she. They dragged her up to the table, and in fear and trembling she turned over the page and read, "The youngest daughter of this king will be married to a pig from the north." Now, if a thunderbolt had fallen upon her from heaven, it would not have frightened her more. She almost died of misery, and if her sisters had not held her up, she would have sunk to the ground and cut her head open. When she came out of the fainting fit into which she had fallen in her terror, her sisters tried to comfort her, saying, "How can you believe such nonsense? When did it ever happen that a king's daughter married a pig?" "What a baby you are," said the other sister. "Has not our father enough soldiers to protect you, even if the disgusting creature did come to woo you?" The youngest princess would fain have let herself be convinced by her sister's words, and have believed what they said, but her heart was heavy. Her thoughts kept turning to the book in which stood written that great happiness waited her sisters, but that a fate was in store for her such as had never before been known in the world. Besides, the thought weighed on her heart that she had been guilty of disobeying her father. She began to get quite ill, and in a few days she was so changed that it was difficult to recognize her. Formerly she had been rosy and merry. Now she was pale, and nothing gave her any pleasure. She gave up playing with her sisters in the garden, ceased to gather flowers to put in her hair, and never sang when they sat together at their spinning and sewing. In the meantime, the king won a great victory, and having completely defeated and driven off the enemy, he hurried home to his daughters, to whom his thoughts had constantly turned. Everyone went out to meet him with cymbals and fifes and drums, and there was great rejoicing over his victorious return. The king's first act on reaching home was to thank heaven for the victory he had gained over the enemies who had risen against him. He then entered his palace, and the three princesses stepped forward to meet him. His joy was great when he saw that they were all well, for the youngest did her best not to appear sad. In spite of this, however, it was not long before the king noticed that his third daughter was getting very thin and sad-looking, and all of a sudden he felt as if a hot iron were entering his soul, for it flashed through his mind that she had disobeyed his word. He felt sure he was right, but to be quite certain he called his daughters to him, questioned them, and ordered them to speak the truth. They confessed everything, but took good care not to say which had led the other two into temptation. The king was so distressed when he heard it that he was almost overcome by grief. But he took heart and tried to comfort his daughters, who looked frightened to death. He saw that what had happened had happened, and that 1,000 words would not alter matters by a hair's breadth. Well, these events had almost been forgotten when one fine day a prince from the east appeared at the court and asked the king for the hand of his eldest daughter. The king gladly gave his consent. A great wedding banquet was prepared, and after 3 days of feasting, the happy pair were accompanied to the frontier with much ceremony and rejoicing. After some time, the same thing befell the second daughter, who was wooed and won by a prince from the west. Now when the young princess saw that everything fell out exactly as had been written in the book, she grew very sad. She refused to eat, and would not put on her fine clothes nor go out walking, and declared that she would rather die than become a laughing-stock to the world. But the king would not allow her to do anything so wrong, and he comforted her in all possible ways. So the time passed, till lo and behold, one fine day an enormous pig from the north walked into the palace, and going straight up to the king said, "Hail, O king! May your life be as prosperous and bright as sunrise on a clear day." "I am glad to see you well, friend," answered the king. "But what wind has brought you hither?" "I come a-wooing," replied the pig. Now the king was astonished to hear so fine a speech from a pig, and at once it occurred to him that something strange was the matter. He would gladly have turned the pig's thoughts in another direction, as he did not wish to give him the princess for a wife, but when he heard that the court and the whole street were full of all the pigs in the world, he saw that there was no escape, and that he must give his consent. The pig was not satisfied with mere promises, but insisted that the wedding should take place within a week, and would not go away till the king had sworn a royal oath upon it. The king then sent for his daughter, and advised her to submit to fate, as there was nothing else to be done. And he added, "My child, the words and whole behavior of this pig are quite unlike those of other pigs. I do not myself believe that he always was a pig. Depend upon it, some magic or witchcraft has been at work. Obey him, and do everything that he wishes, and I feel sure that heaven will shortly send you release." "If you wish me to do this, dear father, I will do it," replied the girl. In the meantime, the wedding day drew near. After the marriage, the pig and his bride set out for his home in one of the royal carriages. On the way, they passed a great bog, and the pig ordered the carriage to stop, and got out and rolled about in the mire till he was covered with mud from head to foot. Then he got back into the carriage and told his wife to kiss him. What was the poor girl to do? She bethought herself of her father's words, and, pulling out her pocket handkerchief, she gently wiped the pig's snout and kissed it. By the time they reached the pig's dwelling, which stood in a thick wood, it was quite dark. They sat down quietly for a little, as they were tired after their drive. Then they had supper together and lay down to rest. During the night, the princess noticed that the pig had changed into a man. She was not a little surprised, but remembering her father's words, she took courage, determined to wait and see what would happen. And now she noticed that every night the pig became a man, and every morning he was changed into a pig before she awoke. This happened several nights running, and the princess could not understand it at all. Clearly her husband must be bewitched. In time she grew quite fond of him. He was so kind and gentle. One fine day, as she was sitting alone, she saw an old witch go past. She felt quite excited, as it was so long since she had seen a human being, and she called out to the old woman to come and talk to her. Among other things, the witch told her that she understood all magic arts, and that she could foretell the future, and knew the healing powers of herbs and plants. "I shall be grateful to you all my life, old dame," said the princess, "if you will tell me what is the matter with my husband. Why is he a pig by day and a human being by night?" I was just going to tell you that one thing, my dear, to show you what a good fortune-teller I am. If you like, I will give you a herb to break the spell." "If you will only give it to me," said the princess, "I will give you anything you choose to ask for I cannot bear to see him in this state." "Here then, my dear child," said the witch, "take this thread, but do not let him know about it, for if he did, it would lose its healing power. At night, when he is asleep, you must get up very quietly and fasten the thread round his left foot as firmly as possible, and you will see in the morning he will not have changed back into a pig, but will still be a man. I do not want any reward. I shall be sufficiently repaid by knowing that you are happy. It almost breaks my heart to think of all you have suffered, and I only wish I had known it sooner, as I should have come to your rescue at once." When the old witch had gone away, the princess hid the thread very carefully, and at night she got up quietly, and with a beating heart she bound the thread round her husband's foot. Just as she was pulling the knot tight, there was a crack, and the thread broke, for it was rotten. Her husband awoke with a start, and said to her, "Unhappy woman, what have you done? 3 days more, and this unholy spell would have fallen from me. And now, who knows how long I may have to go about in this disgusting shape? I must leave you at once, and we shall not meet again until you have worn out 3 pairs of iron shoes and blunted a steel staff in your search for me." So saying, he disappeared. Now, when the princess was left alone, she began to weep and moan in a way that was pitiful to hear. But when she saw that her tears and groans did her no good, she got up, determined to go wherever fate should lead her. On reaching a town, the first thing she did was to order 3 pairs of iron sandals and a steel staff, and having made these preparations for her journey, she set out in search of her husband. On and on she wandered over 9 seas and across 9 continents, through forests with trees whose stems were as thick as beer barrels, stumbling and knocking herself against the fallen branches, then picking herself up and going on. The boughs of the trees hit her face, and the shrubs tore her hands. But on she went, and never looked back. At last, wearied with her long journey, and worn out and overcome with sorrow, but still with hope at her heart, she reached a house. Now, who do you think lived there? The moon. The princess knocked at the door and begged to be let in that she might rest a little. The mother of the moon, when she saw her sad plight, felt a great pity for her, and took her in and nursed and tended her. And while she was here, the princess had a little baby. One day, the mother of the moon asked her, "How was it possible for you, a mortal, to get hither to the house of the moon?" Then the poor princess told her all that happened to her, and added, "I shall always be thankful to heaven for leading me hither, and grateful to you that you took pity on me and on my baby, and did not leave us to die. Now I beg one last favor of you. Can your daughter, the moon, tell me where my husband is?" "She cannot tell you that." "My child," replied the goddess, "but if you will travel towards the east until you reach the dwelling of the sun, he may be able to tell you something." Then she gave the princess a roast chicken to eat, and warned her to be very careful not to lose any of the bones, because they might be of great use to her. When the princess had thanked her once more for her hospitality and for her good advice, and had thrown away 1 pair of shoes that were worn out, and had put on a 2nd pair, she tied up the chicken bones in a bundle, and taking her baby in her arms and her staff in her hand, she set out once more on her wanderings. On and on and on she went across bare sandy deserts, where the roads were so heavy that for every 2 steps that she took forwards she fell back. 1, but she struggled on till she had passed these dreary plains. Next she crossed high rocky mountains, jumping from crag to crag and from peak to peak. Sometimes she would rest for a little on a mountain, and then start afresh, always farther and farther on. She had to cross swamps and to scale mountain peaks covered with flints, so that her feet and knees and elbows were all torn and bleeding, and sometimes she came to a precipice across which she could not jump, and she had to crawl round on hands and knees, helping herself along with her staff. At length, wearied to death, she reached the palace in which the sun lived. She knocked and begged for admission. The mother of the sun opened the door, and was astonished at beholding a mortal from the distant earthly shores, and wept with pity when she heard of all she had suffered. Then, having promised to ask her son about the princess's husband, she hid her in the cellar, so that the sun might notice nothing on his return home, for he was always in a bad temper when he came in at night. The next day, the princess feared that things would not go well with her, for the sun had noticed that someone from the other world had been in the palace. But his mother had soothed him with soft words, assuring him that this was not so. So the princess took heart when she saw how kindly she was treated, and asked, "But how in the world is it possible for the sun to be angry? He is so beautiful and so good to mortals." "This is how it happens," replied the sun's mother. "In the morning, when he stands at the gates of paradise, he is happy and smiles on the whole world. But during the day he gets cross, because he sees all the evil deeds of men, and that is why his heat becomes so scorching. But in the evening he is both sad and angry, for he stands at the gates of death. That is his usual course. From there he comes back here." She then told the princess that she had asked about her husband, but that her son had replied that he knew nothing about him, and that her only hope was to go and inquire of the wind. Before the princess left, the mother of the sun gave her a roast chicken to eat, and advised her to take great care of the bones, which she did, wrapping them up in a bundle. She then threw away her second pair of shoes, which were quite worn out, and with her child on her arm and her staff in her hand, she set forth on her way to the wind. In these wanderings she met with even greater difficulties than before, for she came upon one mountain of flints after another, out of which tongues of fire would flame up. She passed through woods which had never been trodden by human foot, and had to cross fields of ice and avalanches of snow. The poor woman nearly died of these hardships, but she kept a brave heart, and at length she reached an enormous cave in the side of a mountain. This was where the wind lived. There was a little door in the railing in front of the cave, and here the princess knocked and begged for admission. The mother of the wind had pity on her and took her in, that she might rest a little. Here too she was hidden away, so that the wind might not notice her. The next morning the mother of the wind told her that her husband was living in a thick wood, so thick that no axe had been able to cut a way through it. Here he had built himself a sort of house by placing trunks of trees together and fastening them with withes. And here he lived alone, shunning humankind. After the mother of the wind had given the princess a chicken to eat, and had warned her to take care of the bones, she advised her to go by the Milky Way, which at night lies across the sky, and to wander on till she reached her goal. Having thanked the old woman with tears in her eyes for her hospitality, and for the good news she had given her, the princess set out on her journey, and rested neither night nor day, so great was her longing to see her husband again. On and on she walked, until her last pair of shoes fell in pieces. So she threw them away and went on with bare feet, not heeding the bogs, nor the thorns that wounded her, nor the stones that bruised her. At last she reached a beautiful green meadow on the edge of a wood. Her heart was cheered by the sight of the flowers and the soft cool grass, and she sat down and rested for a little. But hearing the birds chirping to their mates among the trees made her think with longing of her husband, and she wept bitterly, and taking her child in her arms, and her bundle of chicken bones on her shoulder, she entered the wood. For 3 days and 3 nights she struggled through it, but could find nothing. She was quite worn out with weariness and hunger, and even her staff was no further help to her, for in her many wanderings it had become quite blunted. She almost gave up in despair, but made one last great effort. And suddenly in a thicket she came upon the sort of house that the Mother of the Wind had described. It had no windows, and the door was up in the roof. Round the house she went in search of steps, but could find none. What was she to do? How was she to get in? She thought and tried in vain to climb up to the door. Then suddenly she bethought her of the chicken bones that she had dragged all that weary way, and she said to herself, "They would not all have told me to take such good care of these bones if they had not had some good reason for doing so. Perhaps now, in my hour of need, they may be of use to me." So she took the bones out of her bundle, and having thought for a moment, she placed the 2 ends together. To her surprise, they stuck tight. Then she added the other bones till she had 2 long poles, the height of the house. These she placed against the wall, at a distance of 1 yard from one another. Across them she placed the other bones, piece by piece, like the steps of a ladder. As soon as one step was finished, she stood upon it and made the next one, and then the next, till she was close to the door. But just as she got near the top, she noticed that there were no bones left for the last rung of the ladder. What was she to do? Without that last step, the whole ladder was useless. She must have lost one of the bones. Then suddenly an idea came to her. Taking a knife, she chopped off her little finger, and placing it on the last step, it stuck as the bones had done. The ladder was complete, and with her child on her arm, she entered the door of the house. Here she found everything in perfect order. Having taken some food, she laid the child down to sleep in a trough that was on the floor, and sat down herself to rest. When her husband, the pig, came back to his house, he was startled by what he saw. At first he could not believe his eyes, and stared at the ladder of bones and at the little finger on the top of it. He felt that some fresh magic must be at work, and in his terror he almost turned away from the house. But then a better idea came to him, and he changed himself into a dove, so that no witchcraft could have power over him, and flew into the room without touching the ladder. Here he found a woman rocking a child. At the sight of her, looking so changed by all that she had suffered for his sake, his heart was moved by such love and longing, and by so great a pity, that he suddenly became a man. The princess stood up when she saw him, and her heart beat with fear, for she did not know him. But when he had told her who he was, in her great joy she forgot all her sufferings, and they seemed as nothing to her. He was a very handsome man, as straight as a fir tree. They sat down together, and she told him all her adventures, and he wept with pity at the tale. And then he told her his own history. "I am a king's son. Once when my father was fighting against some dragons, who were the scourge of our country, I slew the youngest dragon. His mother, who was a witch, cast a spell over me, and changed me into a pig. It was she who, in the disguise of an old woman, gave you the thread to bind round my foot, so that instead of the 3 days that had to run before the spell was broken, I was forced to remain a pig for 3 more years. Now that we have suffered for each other and have found each other again, let us forget the past." And in their joy they kissed one another. Next morning they set out early to return to his father's kingdom. Great was the rejoicing of all the people when they saw him and his wife. His father and his mother embraced them both, and there was feasting in the palace for 3 days and 3 nights. Then they set out to see her father. The old king nearly went out of his mind with joy at beholding his daughter again. When she had told him all her adventures, he said to her, "Did not I tell you that I was quite sure that that creature who wooed and won you as his wife had not been born a pig? You see, my child, how wise you were in doing what I told you. And as the king was old and had no heirs, he put them on the throne in his place. And they ruled as only kings rule who have suffered many things, and if they are not dead, they are still living and ruling happily." The Golden Branch. Once upon a time, there was a king who was so morose and disagreeable that he was feared by all his subjects, and with good reason, as for the most trifling offences he would have their heads cut off. This King Grumpy, as he was called, had one son, who was as different from his father as he could possibly be. No prince equalled him in cleverness and kindness of heart, but unfortunately he was most terribly ugly. He had crooked legs and squinting eyes, a large mouth all on one side, and a hunchback. Never was there a beautiful soul in such a frightful little body, but in spite of his appearance, everybody loved him. The queen, his mother, called him Curlicue, because it was a name she rather liked, and it seemed to suit him. King Grumpy, who cared a great deal more for his own grandeur than for his son's happiness, wished to betroth the prince to the daughter of a neighbouring king, whose great estates joined his own, for he thought that this alliance would make him more powerful than ever. And as for the princess, she would do very well for Prince Curlicue, for she was as ugly as himself. Indeed, though she was the most amiable creature in the world, there was no concealing the fact that she was frightful, and so lame that she always went about with a crutch, and people called her Princess Cabbage Stalk. The king, having asked for and received a portrait of this princess, had it placed in his great hall under a canopy, and sent for Prince Curlicue, to whom he said that as this was the portrait of his future bride, he hoped the prince found it charming. The prince, after one glance at it, turned away with a disdainful air, which greatly offended his father. "Am I to understand that you are not pleased?" he said very sharply. "No, sire," replied the prince. "How could I be pleased to marry an ugly, lame princess?" "Certainly it is becoming in you to object to that," said King Grumpy, "since you are ugly enough to frighten anyone yourself." "That is the very reason," said the prince, "that I wish to marry someone who is not ugly. I am quite tired enough of seeing myself." "I tell you that you shall marry her," cried King Grumpy angrily. And the prince, seeing that it was of no use to remonstrate, bowed and retired. As King Grumpy was not used to being contradicted in anything, he was very much displeased with his son, and ordered that he should be imprisoned in the tower that was kept on purpose for rebellious princes, but had not been used for about 200 years, because there had not been any. The prince thought all the rooms looked strangely old-fashioned with their antique furniture, but as there was a good library, he was pleased, for he was very fond of reading, and he soon got permission to have as many books as he liked. But when he looked at them, he found that they were written in a forgotten language, and he could not understand a single word, though he amused himself with trying. King Grumpy was so convinced that Prince Curlicue would soon get tired of being in prison, and so consent to marry the Princess Cabbage Stalk, that he sent ambassadors to her father, proposing that she should come and be married to his son, who would make her perfectly happy. The king was delighted to receive so good an offer for his unlucky daughter, though, to tell the truth, he found it impossible to admire the prince's portrait which had been sent to him. However, he had it placed in as favourable a light as possible, and sent for the princess, but the moment she caught sight of it, she looked the other way and began to cry. The king, who was very much annoyed to see how greatly she disliked it, took a mirror, and holding it up before the unhappy princess, said, "I see you do not think the prince handsome, but look at yourself, and see if you have any right to complain about that." "Sire," she answered, "I do not wish to complain, only I beg of you, do not make me marry at all. I had rather be the unhappy Princess Cabbage, stalk all my life, than inflict the sight of my ugliness on anyone else." But the king would not listen to her, and sent her away with the ambassadors. In the meantime, the prince was kept safely locked up in his tower, and, that he might be as dull as possible, King Grumpy ordered that no one should speak to him, and that they should give him next to nothing to eat. But all the prince's guards were so fond of him that they did everything they dared, in spite of the king, to make the time pass pleasantly. One day, as the prince was walking up and down the great gallery, thinking how miserable it was to be so ugly, and to be forced to marry an equally frightful princess, he looked up suddenly and noticed that the painted windows were particularly bright and beautiful, and for the sake of doing something that would change his sad thoughts, he began to examine them attentively. He found that the pictures seemed to be scenes from the life of a man who appeared in every window, and the prince, fancying that he saw in this man some resemblance to himself, began to be deeply interested. In the first window there was a picture of him in one of the turrets of the tower. Farther on, he was seeking something in a chink in the wall. In the next picture, he was opening an old cabinet with a golden key. And so it went on through numbers of scenes, and presently the prince noticed that another figure occupied the most important place in each scene, and this time it was a tall, handsome young man. Poor Prince Curlicue found it a pleasure to look at him. He was so straight and strong. By this time it had grown dark, and the prince had to go back to his own room, and to amuse himself he took up a quaint old book and began to look at the pictures. But his surprise was great to find that they represented the same scenes as the windows of the gallery, and what was more, that they seemed to be alive. In looking at pictures of musicians, he saw their hands move and heard sweet sounds. There was a picture of a ball, and the prince could watch the little dancing people come and go. He turned a page, and there was an excellent smell of a savory dinner, and one of the figures who sat at the feast looked at him and said, "We drink your health, Curlicue. Try to give us our queen again, for if you do, you will be rewarded. If not, it will be the worse for you." At these words the prince, who had been growing more and more astonished, was fairly terrified, and dropping the book with a crash, he sank back insensible. The noise he made brought his guards to his aid, and, as soon as he revived, they asked him what was the matter. He answered that he was so faint and giddy with hunger that he had imagined he saw and heard all sorts of strange things. Thereupon, in spite of the king's orders, the guards gave him an excellent supper, and when he had eaten it, he again opened his book, but could see none of the wonderful pictures, which convinced him that he must have been dreaming before. However, when he went into his gallery next day and looked at the painted windows again, he found that they moved, and the figures came and went as if they had been alive. And after watching the one who was like himself find the key in the crack of the turret wall and open the old cabinet, he determined to go and examine the place himself and try to find out what the mystery was. So he went up into the turret and began to search about and tap upon the walls, and all at once he came upon a place that sounded hollow. Taking a hammer, he broke away a bit of the stone and found behind it a little golden key. The next thing to do was to find the cabinet, and the prince soon came to it hidden away in a dark corner. though indeed it was so old and battered-looking that he would never have noticed it of his own accord. At first he could not see any keyhole, but after a careful search he found one hidden in the carving, and the golden key just fitted it. So the prince gave it a vigorous turn, and the doors flew open. Ugly and old as the cabinet was outside, nothing could have been more rich and beautiful than what met the prince's astonished eyes. Every drawer was made of crystal, of amber, or of some precious stone, and was quite full of every kind of treasure. Prince Curlicue was delighted. He opened one after another, until at last he came to one tiny drawer which contained only an emerald key. "I believe that this must open that little golden door in the middle," said the prince to himself, and he fitted in the little key and turned it. The tiny door swung back, and a soft crimson light gleamed over the whole cabinet. The prince found that it proceeded from an immense glowing carbuncle, made into a box, which lay before him. He lost no time in opening it, but what was his horror when he found that it contained a man's hand, which was holding a portrait. His first thought was to put back the terrible box and fly from the turret. But a voice in his ear said, "This hand belonged to one whom you can help and restore. Look at this beautiful portrait, the original of which was the cause of all my misfortunes, and if you wish to help me, go without a moment's delay to the great gallery, notice where the sun's rays fall most brightly, and if you seek there, you will find my treasure." The voice ceased, and though the prince in his bewilderment asked various questions, he received no answer. So he put back the box and locked the cabinet up again, and, having replaced the key in the crack in the wall, hastened down to the gallery. When he entered it, all the windows shook and clattered in the strangest way, but the prince did not heed them. He was looking so carefully for the place where the sun shone most brightly, and it seemed to him that it was upon the portrait of a most splendidly handsome young man. He went up and examined it, and found that it rested against the ebony and gold panelling, just like any of the other pictures in the gallery. He was puzzled, not knowing what to do next, until it occurred to him to see if the windows would help him, and, looking at the nearest, he saw a picture of himself lifting the picture from the wall. The prince took the hint, and lifting aside the picture without difficulty, found himself in a marble hall adorned with statues. From this he passed on through numbers of splendid rooms, until at last he reached one all hung with blue gauze. The walls were of turquoises, and upon a low couch lay a lovely lady, who seemed to be asleep. Her hair, black as ebony, was spread across the pillows, making her face look ivory white, and the prince noticed that she was unquiet. And when he softly advanced, fearing to wake her, he could hear her sigh, and murmur to herself, "How dared you think to win my love by separating me from my beloved Florimond, and in my presence cutting off that dear hand that even you should have feared and honoured?" And then the tears rolled slowly down the lovely lady's cheeks, and Prince Curlicue began to comprehend that she was under an enchantment, and that it was the hand of her lover that he had found. At this moment a huge eagle flew into the room, holding in its talons a golden branch, upon which were growing what looked like clusters of cherries. Only every cherry was a single glowing ruby. This he presented to the prince, who guessed by this time that he was in some way to break the enchantment that surrounded the sleeping lady. Taking the branch, he touched her lightly with it, saying, "Fair one, I know not by what enchantment thou art bound, but in the name of thy beloved Florimond, I conjure thee to come back to the life which thou hast lost, but not forgotten." Instantly the lady opened her lustrous eyes and saw the eagle hovering near. "Ah, stay, dear love, stay," she cried. But the eagle, uttering a dolorous cry, fluttered his broad wings and disappeared. Then the lady turned to Prince Curlicue and said, "I know that it is to you I owe my deliverance from an enchantment which has held me for 200 years. If there is anything that I can do for you in return, you have only to tell me, and all my fairy power shall be used to make you happy." "Madam," said Prince Curlicue, "I wish to be allowed to restore your beloved Florimond to his natural form, since I cannot forget the tears you shed for him." "That is very amiable of you, dear Prince," said the fairy, "but it is reserved for another person to do that. I cannot explain more at present, but is there nothing you wish for yourself?" "Madam," cried the prince, flinging himself down at her feet, "only look at my ugliness. I am called Curlicue, and am an object of derision. I entreat you to make me less ridiculous." "Rise, Prince," said the fairy, touching him with the golden branch. "Be as accomplished as you are handsome, and take the name of Prince Peerless, since that is the only title which will suit you now." Silent from joy, the prince kissed her hand to express his thanks, and when he rose and saw his new reflection in the mirrors which surrounded him, he understood that Curlicue was indeed gone forever. "How I wish," said the fairy, "that I dared to tell you what is in store for you, and warn you of the traps which lie in your path, but I must not. Fly from the tower, Prince, and remember that the fairy Douceline will be your friend always." When she had finished speaking, the prince, to his great astonishment, found himself no longer in the tower, but set down in a thick forest at least 100 leagues away from it. And there we must leave him for the present and see what was happening elsewhere. When the guards found that the prince did not ask for his supper as usual, they went into his room, and not finding him there, were very much alarmed, and searched the tower from turret to dungeon, but without success. Knowing that the king would certainly have their heads cut off for allowing the prince to escape, they then agreed to say that he was ill, and after making the smallest among them look as much like Prince Curlicue as possible, they put him into his bed and sent to inform the king. King Grumpy was quite delighted to hear that his son was ill, for he thought that he would all the sooner be brought to do as he wished and marry the princess. So he sent back to the guards to say that the prince was to be treated as severely as before, which was just what they had hoped he would say. In the meantime, the Princess Cabbage Stork had reached the palace, travelling in a litter. King Grumpy went out to meet her, but when he saw her, with a skin like a tortoise's, her thick eyebrows meeting above her large nose, and her mouth from ear to ear, he could not help crying out, "Well, I must say Curlicue is ugly enough, but I don't think you need have thought twice before consenting to marry him." "Sire," she replied, "I know too well what I am like to be hurt by what you say, but I assure you that I have no wish to marry your son. I had rather be called Princess Cabbage, Stork, than Queen Curlicue." This made King Grumpy very angry. "Your father has sent you here to marry my son," he said, "and you may be sure that I am not going to offend him by altering his arrangements." So the poor princess was sent away in disgrace to her own apartments, and the ladies who attended upon her were charged to bring her to a better mind. At this juncture the guards, who were in great fear that they would be found out, sent to tell the king that his son was dead, which annoyed him very much. He at once made up his mind that it was entirely the princess's fault, and gave orders that she should be imprisoned in the tower in Prince Curlicue's place. The Princess Cabbage Stork was immensely astonished at this unjust proceeding, and sent many messages of remonstrance to King Grumpy, but he was in such a temper that no one dared to deliver them, or to send the letters which the princess wrote to her father. However, As she did not know this, she lived in hope of soon going back to her own country and tried to amuse herself as well as she could until the time should come. Every day she walked up and down the long gallery until she too was attracted and fascinated by the ever-changing pictures in the windows and recognized herself in one of the figures. They seem to have taken a great delight in painting me since I came to this country, she said to herself. One would think that I and my crutch were put in on purpose to make that slim, charming young shepherdess in the next picture look prettier by contrast. Ah, how nice it would be to be as pretty as that. And then she looked at herself in a mirror and turned away quickly with tears in her eyes from the doleful sight. All at once she became aware that she was not alone, for behind her stood a tiny old woman in a cap, who was as ugly again as herself, and quite as lame. "Princess," she said, "your regrets are so piteous that I have come to offer you the choice of goodness or beauty. If you wish to be pretty, you shall have your way, but you will also be vain, capricious, and frivolous. If you remain as you are now, you shall be wise and amiable and modest." "Alas, madam," cried the princess, "is it impossible to be at once wise and beautiful?" "No, child," answered the old woman, "only to you it is decreed that you must choose between the two. See, I have brought with me my white and yellow muff. Breathe upon the yellow side, and you will become like the pretty shepherdess you so much admire, and you will have won the love of the handsome shepherd whose picture I have already seen you studying with interest. Breathe upon the white side, and your looks will not alter, but you will grow better and happier day by day. Now you may choose." "Ah, well," said the princess, "I suppose one can't have everything, and it's certainly better to be good than pretty." And so she breathed upon the white side of the muff and thanked the old fairy, who immediately disappeared. The Princess Cabbage. Stork felt very forlorn when she was gone, and began to think that it was quite time her father sent an army to rescue her. "If I could but get up into the turret," she thought, "to see if anyone is coming." But to climb up there seemed impossible. Nevertheless, she presently hit upon a plan. The great clock was in the turret, as she knew, though the weights hung down into the gallery. Taking one of them off the rope, she tied herself on in its place, and when the clock was wound, up she went triumphantly into the turret. She looked out over the country the first thing, but seeing nothing, she sat down to rest a little, and accidentally leant back against the wall which Curlicue, or rather Prince Peerless, had so hastily mended. Out fell the broken stone, and with it the golden key. The clatter it made upon the floor attracted the Princess Cabbage, Stork's, attention. She picked it up, and after a moment's consideration decided that it must belong to the curious old cabinet in the corner, which had no visible keyhole. And then it was not long before she had it open, and was admiring the treasures it contained as much as Prince Peerless had done before her, and at last she came to the carbuncle box. No sooner had she opened it than with a shudder of horror she tried to throw it down, but found that some mysterious power compelled her to hold it against her will. And at this moment a voice in her ear said softly, "Take courage, princess. Upon this adventure your future happiness depends." "What am I to do?" said the princess, trembling. "Take the box," replied the voice, "and hide it under your pillow. And when you see an eagle, give it to him without losing a moment." Terrified as the princess was, she did not hesitate to obey, and hastened to put back all the other precious things precisely as she had found them. By this time, her guards were seeking her everywhere, and they were amazed to find her up in the turret, for they said she could only have got there by magic. For 3 days nothing happened, but at last in the night The princess heard something flutter against her window, and drawing back her curtains, she saw in the moonlight that it was an eagle. Limping across at her utmost speed, she threw the window open, and the great eagle sailed in, beating with his wings for joy. The princess lost no time in offering it the carbuncle box, which it grasped in its talons and instantly disappeared, leaving in its place the most beautiful prince she had ever seen, who was splendidly dressed and wore a diamond crown. "Princess," said he, "for 200 years has a wicked enchanter kept me here. We both loved the same fairy, but she preferred me. However, he was more powerful than I, and succeeded, when for a moment I was off my guard, in changing me into an eagle, while my queen was left in an enchanted sleep. I knew that after 200 years a prince would recall her to the light of day, and a princess, in restoring to me the hand which my enemy had cut off, would give me back my natural form. The fairy who watches over your destiny told me this, and it was she who guided you to the cabinet in the turret where she had placed my hand. It is she also who permits me to show my gratitude to you by granting whatever favor you may ask of me. Tell me, princess, what is it that you wish for most? Shall I make you as beautiful as you deserve to be?" "Ah, if you only would!" cried the princess, and at the same moment she heard a cracking in all her bones. She grew tall and straight and pretty, with eyes like shining stars and a skin as white as milk. "Oh, wonderful! Can this really be my poor little self?" she exclaimed, looking down in amazement at her tiny, worn-out crutch as it lay upon the floor. "Indeed, princess," replied Florimond, "it is yourself, but you must have a new name, since the old one does not suit you now. Be called Princess Sunbeam, for you are bright and charming enough to deserve the name." And so saying, he disappeared, and the princess, without knowing how she got there, found herself walking under shady trees by a clear river. Of course, the first thing she did was to look at her own reflection in the water, and she was extremely surprised to find that she was exactly like the shepherdess she had so much admired, and wore the same white dress and flowery wreath that she had seen in the painted windows. To complete the resemblance, a flock of sheep appeared, grazing round her, and she found a gay crook adorned with flowers upon the bank of the river. Quite tired out by so many new and wonderful experiences, the princess sat down to rest at the foot of a tree, and there she fell fast asleep. Now, it happened that it was in this very country that Prince Peerless had been set down, and while the Princess Sunbeam was still sleeping peacefully, he came strolling along in search of a shady pasture for his sheep. The moment he caught sight of the princess, he recognized her as the charming shepherdess whose picture he had seen so often in the tower, and as she was far prettier than he had remembered her, he was delighted that chance had led him that way. He was still watching her admiringly when the princess opened her eyes, and as she also recognized him, they were soon great friends. The princess asked Prince Peerless, as he knew the country better than she did, to tell her of some peasant who would give her a lodging, and he said he knew of an old woman whose cottage would be the very place for her. It was so nice and so pretty. So they went there together, and the princess was charmed with the old woman and everything belonging to her. Supper was soon spread for her under a shady tree, and she invited the prince to share the cream and brown bread which the old woman provided. This he was delighted to do, and having first fetched from his own garden all the strawberries, cherries, nuts, and flowers he could find, they sat down together and were very merry. After this, they met every day as they guarded their flocks, and were so happy that Prince Peerless begged the princess to marry him, so that they might never be parted again. Now, though the Princess Sunbeam appeared to be only a poor shepherdess, she never forgot that she was a real princess, and she was not at all sure that she ought to marry a humble shepherd, though she knew she would like to do so very much. So she resolved to consult an enchanter, of whom she had heard a great deal since she had been a shepherdess, and without saying a word to anybody, she set out to find the castle in which he lived with his sister, who was a powerful fairy. The way was long, and lay through a thick wood, where the princess heard strange voices calling to her from every side, but she was in such a hurry that she stopped for nothing, and at last she came to the courtyard of the enchanter's castle. The grass and briars were growing as high as if it were 100 years since anyone had set foot there, but the princess got through at last, though she gave herself a good many scratches by the way, and then she went into a dark, gloomy hall, where there was but one tiny hole in the wall through which the daylight could enter. The hangings were all of bats' wings, and from the ceiling hung 12 cats, who filled the hall with their ear-piercing yells. Upon the long table 12 mice were fastened by the tail, and just in front of each one's nose, but quite beyond its reach, lay a tempting morsel of fat bacon. So the cats could always see the mice, but could not touch them, and the hungry mice were tormented by the sight and smell of the delicious morsels which they could never seize. The princess was looking at the poor creatures in dismay, when the enchanter suddenly entered, wearing a long black robe and with a crocodile upon his head. In his hand he carried a whip made of 20 long snakes, all alive and writhing, and the princess was so terrified at the sight that she heartily wished she had never come. Without saying a word, she ran to the door, but it was covered with a thick spider's web, and when she broke it, she found another, and another, and another. In fact, there was no end to them. The princess's arms ached with tearing them down, and yet she was no nearer to getting out, and the wicked enchanter behind her laughed maliciously. At last he said, "You might spend the rest of your life over that without doing any good. But as you are young, and quite the prettiest creature I have seen for a long time, I will marry you if you like, and I will give you those cats and mice that you see there for your own. They are princes and princesses who have happened to offend me. They used to love one another as much as they now hate one another. Aha! It's a pretty little revenge to keep them like that." "Oh, if you would only change me into a mouse too," cried the princess. "Oh, so you won't marry me?" said he. "Little simpleton, you should have everything heart can desire." "No, indeed. Nothing should make me marry you. In fact, I don't think I shall ever love anyone," cried the princess. "In that case," said the enchanter, touching her, "you had better become a particular kind of creature that is neither fish nor fowl. You shall be light and airy, and as green as the grass you live in. Off with you, Madam Grasshopper." And the princess, rejoicing to find herself free once more, skipped out into the garden, the prettiest little green grasshopper in the world. But as soon as she was safely out, she began to be rather sorry for herself. "Ah, Florimond," she sighed, "is this the end of your gift? Certainly beauty is short-lived, and this funny little face and a green crepe dress are a comical end to it. I had better have married my amiable shepherd. It must be for my pride that I am condemned to be a grasshopper, and sing day and night in the grass by this brook, when I feel far more inclined to cry." In the meantime, Prince Peerless had discovered the princess's absence, and was lamenting over it by the river's brim, when he suddenly became aware of the presence of a little old woman. She was quaintly dressed in a ruff and farthingale, and a velvet hood covered her snow-white hair. "You seem sorrowful, my son," she said. "What is the matter?" "Alas, mother," answered the prince, "I have lost my sweet shepherdess, but I am determined to find her again, though I should have to traverse the whole world in search of her." "Go that way, my son," said the old woman, pointing towards the path that led to the castle. "I have an idea that you will soon overtake her." The prince thanked her heartily and set out. As he met with no hindrance, he soon reached the enchanted wood which surrounded the castle, and there he thought he saw the Princess Sunbeam gliding before him among the trees. Prince Peerless hastened after her at the top of his speed, but could not get any nearer. Then he called to her, "Sunbeam!" "My darling, only wait for me a moment." But the phantom did but fly the faster, and the prince spent the whole day in this vain pursuit. When night came, he saw the castle before him all lighted up, and as he imagined that the princess must be in it, he made haste to get there too. He entered without difficulty, and in the hall the terrible old fairy met him. She was so thin that the light shone through her, and her eyes glowed like lamps. Her skin was like a shark's. Her arms were thin as laths, and her fingers like spindles. Nevertheless, she wore rouge and patches, a mantle of silver brocade, and a crown of diamonds, and her dress was covered with jewels and green and pink ribbons. "At last you have come to see me, Prince," said she. "Don't waste another thought upon that little shepherdess who is unworthy of your notice. I am the Queen of the Comets, and can bring you to great honor if you will marry me." "Marry you, madam?" cried the prince in horror. "No, I will never consent to that." Thereupon the fairy, in a rage, gave 2 strokes of her wand and filled the gallery with horrible goblins, against whom the prince had to fight for his life. Though he had only his dagger, he defended himself so well that he escaped without any harm, and presently the old fairy stopped the fray and asked the prince if he was still of the same mind. When he answered firmly that he was, she called up the appearance of the Princess Sunbeam to the other end of the gallery, and said, "You see your beloved there? Take care what you are about, for if you again refuse to marry me, she shall be torn in pieces by 2 tigers." The prince was distracted, for he fancied he heard his dear shepherdess weeping and begging him to save her. In despair he cried, "Oh, Fairy Dusseline, have you abandoned me after so many promises of friendship? Help, help us now!" Immediately a soft voice said in his ear, "Be firm, happen what may, and seek the golden branch." Thus encouraged, the prince persevered in his refusal, and at length the old fairy in a fury cried, "Get out of my sight, obstinate prince! Become a cricket!" And instantly the handsome Prince Peerless became a poor little black cricket, whose only idea would have been to find himself a cosy cranny behind some blazing hearth, if he had not luckily remembered the Fairy Dusseline's injunction to seek the golden branch. So he hastened to depart from the fatal castle and sought shelter in a hollow tree, where he found a forlorn-looking little grasshopper crouching in a corner, too miserable to sing. Without in the least expecting an answer, the prince asked it, "And where may you be going, Gamma Grasshopper?" "Where are you going yourself, Gaffer Cricket?" replied the grasshopper. "What? Can you speak?" said he. "Why should I not speak as well as you? Isn't a grasshopper as good as a cricket?" said she. "I can talk because I was a prince," said the cricket. "And for that very same reason I ought to be able to talk more than you." "For I was a princess," replied the grasshopper. "Then you have met with the same fate as I have," said he. "But where are you going now? Cannot we journey together?" "I seem to hear a voice in the air which said, 'Be firm, happen what may, and seek the golden branch,'" answered the grasshopper. "And I thought the command must be for me. So I started at once, though I don't know the way." At this moment their conversation was interrupted by 2 mice, who, breathless from running, flung themselves headlong through the hole into the tree, nearly crushing the grasshopper and the cricket, though they got out of the way as fast as they could and stood up in a dark corner. "Ah, madam," said the fatter of the 2, "I have such a pain in my side from running so fast. How does your highness find yourself?" "I have pulled my tail off," replied the younger mouse, But as I should still be on the sorcerer's table unless I had, I do not regret it. Are we pursued, think you? How lucky we were to escape! I only trust that we may escape cats and traps and reach the golden branch soon, said the fat mouse. You know the way then, said the other. Oh dear, yes, as well as the way to my own house, madam. This golden branch is indeed a marvel. A single leaf from it makes one rich forever. It breaks enchantments and makes all who approach it young and beautiful. We must set out for it at the break of day. May we have the honour of travelling with you, this respectable cricket and myself, said the grasshopper, stepping forward. We also are on a pilgrimage to the golden branch. The mice courteously assented, and after many polite speeches the whole party fell asleep. With the earliest dawn they were on their way, and though the mice were in constant fear of being overtaken or trapped, they reached the golden branch in safety. It grew in the midst of a wonderful garden, all the paths of which were strewn with pearls as big as peas. The roses were crimson diamonds with emerald leaves. The pomegranates were garnets, the marigolds topazes, the daffodils yellow diamonds, the violets sapphires, the cornflowers turquoises, the tulips amethysts, opals and diamonds, so that the garden borders blazed like the sun. The golden branch itself had become as tall as a forest tree, and sparkled with ruby cherries to its topmost twig. No sooner had the grasshopper and the cricket touched it than they were restored to their natural forms, and their surprise and joy were great when they recognized each other. At this moment Florimond and the fairy Douceline appeared in great splendor, and the fairy, as she descended from her chariot, said with a smile, "So, you two have found one another again, I see, but I have still a surprise left for you. Don't hesitate, Princess, to tell your devoted shepherd how dearly you love him, as he is the very prince your father sent you to marry. So come here, both of you, and let me crown you, and we will have the wedding at once." The prince and princess thanked her with all their hearts, and declared that to her they owed all their happiness. And then the two princesses, who had so lately been mice, came and begged that the fairy would use her power to release their unhappy friends who were still under the enchanter's spell. "Really," said the fairy Douceline, "on this happy occasion I cannot find it in my heart to refuse you anything." And she gave 3 strokes of her wand upon the golden branch, and immediately all the prisoners in the enchanter's castle found themselves free, and came with all speed to the wonderful garden, where one touch of the golden branch restored each one to his natural form, and they greeted one another with many rejoicings. To complete her generous work, the fairy presented them with a wonderful cabinet and all the treasures it contained, which were worth at least 10 kingdoms. But to Prince Peerless and the Princess Sunbeam she gave the palace and garden of the Golden Branch, where, immensely rich and greatly beloved by all their subjects, they lived happily ever after. The Golden Goose. There was once a man who had 3 sons. The youngest of them was called Dullhead, and was sneered and jeered at and snubbed on every possible opportunity. One day it happened that the eldest son wished to go into the forest to cut wood, and before he started his mother gave him a fine rich cake and a bottle of wine, so that he might be sure not to suffer from hunger or thirst. When he reached the forest, he met a little old grey man who wished him "Good morning," and said, "Do give me a piece of that cake you have got in your pocket, and let me have a draught of your wine. I am so hungry and thirsty." But this clever son replied, "If I give you my cake and wine, I shall have none left. For myself, you just go your own way." And he left the little man standing there and went further on into the forest. There he began to cut down a tree, but before long he made a false stroke with his axe and cut his own arm so badly that he was obliged to go home and have it bound up. Then the second son went to the forest, and his mother gave him a good cake and a bottle of wine, as she had to his elder brother. He too met the little old grey man, who begged him for a morsel of cake and a draught of wine. But the second son spoke most sensibly too, and said, "Whatever I give to you I deprive myself of. Just go your own way, will you?" Not long after his punishment overtook him, for no sooner had he struck a couple of blows on a tree with his axe, than he cut his leg so badly that he had to be carried home. So then Dullhead said, "Father, let me go out and cut wood." But his father answered, "Both your brothers have injured themselves. You had better leave it alone. You know nothing about it." But Dullhead begged so hard to be allowed to go that at last his father said, "Very well then, go. Perhaps when you have hurt yourself, you may learn to know better." His mother only gave him a very plain cake made with water and baked in the cinders, and a bottle of sour beer. When he got to the forest, he too met the little grey old man, who greeted him and said, "Give me a piece of your cake and a draught from your bottle. I am so hungry and thirsty." And Dullhead replied, "I've only got a cinder cake and some sour beer, but if you care to have that, let us sit down and eat." So they sat down, and when Dullhead brought out his cake, he found it had turned into a fine rich cake, and the sour beer into excellent wine. Then they ate and drank, and when they had finished, the little man said, "Now I will bring you luck, because you have a kind heart, and are willing to share what you have with others. There stands an old tree. Cut it down, and amongst its roots you'll find something." With that the little man took leave. Then Dullhead fell to at once to hew down the tree, and when it fell he found amongst its roots a goose, whose feathers were all of pure gold. He lifted it out, carried it off, and took it with him to an inn where he meant to spend the night. Now the landlord of the inn had 3 daughters, and when they saw the goose, they were filled with curiosity as to what this wonderful bird could be, and each longed to have one of its golden feathers. The eldest thought to herself, "No doubt I shall soon find a good opportunity to pluck out one of its feathers," and the first time Dullhead happened to leave the room, she caught hold of the goose by its wing. But, lo and behold! Her fingers seemed to stick fast to the goose, and she could not take her hand away. Soon after the second daughter came in, and thought to pluck a golden feather for herself too, but hardly had she touched her sister than she stuck fast as well. At last the third sister came with the same intentions, but the other 2 cried out, "Keep off! For heaven's sake, keep off!" The younger sister could not imagine why she was to keep off, and thought to herself, "If they are both there, why should not I be there too?" So she sprang to them, but no sooner had she touched one of them than she stuck fast to her. So they all 3 had to spend the night with the goose. Next morning, Dullhead tucked the goose under his arm and went off, without in the least troubling himself about the 3 girls who were hanging on to it. They just had to run after him, right or left, as best they could. In the middle of a field they met the parson, and when he saw this procession he cried, "For shame, you bold girls! What do you mean by running after a young fellow through the fields like that? Do you call that proper behaviour?" And with that he caught the youngest girl by the hand to try and draw her away. But directly he touched her, he hung on himself, and had to run along with the rest of them. Not long after the clerk came that way, and was much surprised to see the parson following the footsteps of 3 girls. "Why, where is your reverence going so fast?" cried he. "Don't forget, there is to be a christening today." And he ran after him, caught him by the sleeve, and hung on to it himself, As the five of them trotted along in this fashion one after the other, two peasants were coming from their work with their hoes. On seeing them, the parson called out and begged them to come and rescue him and the clerk. But no sooner did they touch the clerk than they stuck on too. And so there were 7 of them running after Dullhead and his goose. After a time, they all came to a town where a king reigned, whose daughter was so serious and solemn that no one could ever manage to make her laugh. So the king had decreed that whoever should succeed in making her laugh should marry her. When Dullhead heard this, he marched before the princess with his goose and its appendages, and as soon as she saw these 7 people continually running after each other, she burst out laughing and could not stop herself. Then Dullhead claimed her as his bride, but the king, who did not much fancy him as a son-in-law, made all sorts of objections, and told him he must first find a man who could drink up a whole cellarful of wine. Dullhead bethought him of the little grey man who could, he felt sure, help him. So he went off to the forest, and on the very spot where he had cut down the tree, he saw a man sitting, with a most dismal expression of face. Dullhead asked him what he was taking so much to heart, and the man answered, "I don't know how I am ever to quench this terrible thirst I am suffering from. Cold water doesn't suit me at all. To be sure, I've emptied a whole barrel of wine. But what is 1 drop on a hot stone?" "I think I can help you," said Dullhead. "Come with me, and you shall drink to your heart's content." So he took him to the king's cellar, and the man sat down before the huge casks and drank till he drank up the whole contents of the cellar before the day closed. Then Dullhead asked once more for his bride, but the king felt vexed at the idea of a stupid fellow whom people called Dullhead carrying off his daughter, and he began to make fresh conditions. He required Dullhead to find a man who could eat a mountain of bread. Dullhead did not wait to consider long, but went straight off to the forest, and there on the same spot sat a man who was drawing in a strap as tight as he could round his body, and making a most woeful face the while. Said he, "I've eaten up a whole oven full of loaves, but what's the good of that to anyone who is as hungry as I am? I declare my stomach feels quite empty, and I must draw my belt tight if I'm not to die of starvation." Dullhead was delighted and said, "Get up and come with me, and you shall have plenty to eat," and he brought him to the king's court. Now the king had given orders to have all the flour in his kingdom brought together, and to have a huge mountain baked of it. But the man from the wood just took up his stand before the mountain and began to eat, and in one day it had all vanished. For the 3rd time, Dullhead asked for his bride, but again the king tried to make some evasion, and demanded a ship which could sail on land or water. "When you come sailing in such a ship," said he, "you shall have my daughter without further delay." Again Dullhead started off to the forest, and there he found the little old grey man with whom he had shared his cake, and who said, "I have eaten, and I have drunk for you, and now I will give you the ship. I have done all this for you because you were kind and merciful to me." Then he gave Dullhead a ship which could sail on land or water, and when the king saw it, he felt he could no longer refuse him his daughter. So they celebrated the wedding with great rejoicings, and after the king's death, Dullhead succeeded to the kingdom, and lived happily with his wife for many years after. The Little Good Mouse. Once upon a time there lived a king and queen who loved each other so much that they were never happy unless they were together. Day after day they went out hunting or fishing. Night after night they went to balls or to the opera. They sang and danced and ate sugar plums, and were the gayest of the gay. And all their subjects followed their example, so that the kingdom was called the Joyous Land. Now in the next kingdom Everything was as different as it could possibly be. The king was sulky and savage, and never enjoyed himself at all. He looked so ugly and cross that all his subjects feared him, and he hated the very sight of a cheerful face. So if he ever caught anyone smiling, he had his head cut off that very minute. This kingdom was very appropriately called the Land of Tears. Now when this wicked king heard of the happiness of the jolly king, he was so jealous that he collected a great army and set out to fight him, and the news of his approach was soon brought to the king and queen. The queen, when she heard of it, was frightened out of her wits and began to cry bitterly. "Sire," she said, "let us collect all our riches and run away as far as ever we can to the other side of the world." But the king answered, "Fie, madam, I am far too brave for that. It is better to die than to be a coward." Then he assembled all his armed men, and after bidding the queen a tender farewell, he mounted his splendid horse and rode away. When he was lost to sight, the queen could do nothing but weep and wring her hands and cry, "Alas! If the king is killed, what will become of me and of my little daughter?" And she was so sorrowful that she could neither eat nor sleep. The king sent her a letter every day, but at last, one morning, as she looked out of the palace window, she saw a messenger approaching in hot haste. "What news, courier?" "What news?" cried the queen, and he answered, "The battle is lost, and the king is dead, and in another moment the enemy will be here." The poor queen fell back insensible, and all her ladies carried her to bed and stood round her weeping and wailing. Then began a tremendous noise and confusion, and they knew that the enemy had arrived, and very soon they heard the king himself stamping about the palace seeking the queen. Then her ladies put the little princess into her arms and covered her up, head and all, in the bedclothes, and ran for their lives, and the poor queen lay there shaking and hoping she would not be found. But very soon the wicked king clattered into the room, and in a fury, because the queen would not answer when he called to her, he tore back her silken coverings and tweaked off her lace cap, and when all her lovely hair came tumbling down over her shoulders, he wound it 3 times round his hand and threw her over his shoulder, where he carried her like a sack of flour. The poor queen held her little daughter safe in her arms and shrieked for mercy, but the wicked king only mocked her and begged her to go on shrieking, as it amused him, and so mounted his great black horse and rode back to his own country. When he got there, he declared that he would have the queen and the little princess hanged on the nearest tree. But his courtiers said that seemed a pity, for when the baby grew up, she would be a very nice wife for the king's only son. The king was rather pleased with this idea, and shut the queen up in the highest room of a tall tower, which was very tiny and miserably furnished with a table and a very hard bed upon the floor. Then he sent for a fairy who lived near his kingdom, and after receiving her with more politeness than he generally showed, and entertaining her at a sumptuous feast, he took her up to see the queen. The fairy was so touched by the sight of her misery that when she kissed her hand she whispered, "Courage, madam. I think I see a way to help you." The queen, a little comforted by these words, received her graciously and begged her to take pity upon the poor little princess, who had met with such a sudden reverse of fortune. But the king got very cross when he saw them whispering together and cried harshly, "Make an end of these fine speeches. Madam, I brought you here to tell me if the child will grow up pretty and fortunate." Then the fairy answered that the princess would be as pretty and clever and well brought up as it was possible to be, and the old king growled to the queen that it was lucky for her that it was so, as they would certainly have been hanged if it were otherwise. Then he stamped off, taking the fairy with him and leaving the poor queen in tears. How can I wish my little daughter to grow up pretty if she is to be married to that horrid little dwarf, the king's son?" she said to herself. "And yet, if she is ugly, we shall both be killed. If I could only hide her away somewhere, so that the cruel king could never find her." As the days went on, the queen and the little princess grew thinner and thinner, for their hard-hearted gaoler gave them every day only 3 boiled peas and a tiny morsel of black bread. So they were always terribly hungry. At last, one evening, as the queen sat at her spinning wheel, for the king was so avaricious that she was made to work day and night, she saw a tiny, pretty little mouse creep out of a hole, and said to it, "Alas, little creature, what are you coming to look for here? I only have 3 peas for my day's provision, so unless you wish to fast, you must go elsewhere." But the mouse ran hither and thither, and danced and capered so prettily, that at last the queen gave it her last pea, which she was keeping for her supper, saying, "Here, little one, eat it up. I have nothing better to offer you, but I give this willingly in return for the amusement I have had from you." She had hardly spoken when she saw upon the table a delicious little roast partridge, and 2 dishes of preserved fruit. "Truly," said she, "a kind action never goes unrewarded." And she and the little princess ate their supper with great satisfaction. And then the queen gave what was left to the little mouse, who danced better than ever afterwards. The next morning came the gaoler with the queen's allowance of 3 peas, which he brought in upon a large dish to make them look smaller. But as soon as he set it down, the little mouse came and ate up all 3, so that when the queen wanted her dinner, there was nothing left for her. Then she was quite provoked, and said, "What a bad little beast that mouse must be! If it goes on like this, I shall be starved." But when she glanced at the dish again, it was covered with all sorts of nice things to eat, and the queen made a very good dinner, and was gayer than usual over it. But afterwards, as she sat at her spinning wheel, she began to consider what would happen if the little princess did not grow up pretty enough to please the king. And she said to herself, "Oh, if I could only think of some way of escaping." As she spoke, she saw the little mouse playing in a corner with some long straws. The queen took them and began to plait them, saying, "If only I had straws enough, I would make a basket with them, and let my baby down in it from the window to any kind passer-by who would take care of her." By the time the straws were all plaited, the little mouse had dragged in more and more, until the queen had plenty to make her basket, and she worked at it day and night, while the little mouse danced for her amusement, and at dinner and supper time the queen gave it the 3 peas and the bit of black bread, and always found something good in the dish in their place. She really could not imagine where all the nice things came from. At last one day, when the basket was finished, the queen was looking out of the window to see how long a cord she must make to lower it to the bottom of the tower, when she noticed a little old woman who was leaning upon her stick and looking up at her. Presently she said, "I know your trouble, madam. If you like, I will help you." "Oh, my dear friend," said the queen, "if you really wish to be of use to me, you will come at the time that I will appoint, and I will let down my poor little baby in a basket. If you will take her and bring her up for me, when I am rich, I will reward you splendidly." "I don't care about the reward," said the old woman, "but there is one thing I should like. You must know that I am very particular about what I eat, and if there is one thing that I fancy above all others, it is a plump, tender little mouse. If there is such a thing in your garret, just throw it down to me, and in return I will promise that your little daughter shall be well taken care of." The queen, when she heard this, began to cry, but made no answer, and the old woman, after waiting a few minutes, asked her what was the matter. "Why," said the queen, "there is only one mouse in this garret, and that is such a dear, pretty little thing that I cannot bear to think of its being killed." "What?" cried the old woman in a rage. "Do you care more for a miserable mouse than for your own baby? Goodbye, madam. I leave you to enjoy its company. And for my own part, I thank my stars that I can get plenty of mice without troubling you to give them to me." And she hobbled off, grumbling and growling. As to the queen, she was so disappointed that, in spite of finding a better dinner than usual, and seeing the little mouse dancing in its merriest mood, she could do nothing but cry. That night, when her baby was fast asleep, she packed it into the basket and wrote on a slip of paper, "This unhappy little girl is called Delicia." This she pinned to its robe, and then very sadly she was shutting the basket, when in sprang the little mouse and sat on the baby's pillow. "Ah, little one," said the queen, "it cost me dear to save your life. How shall I know now whether my Delicia is being taken care of or no? Anyone else would have let the greedy old woman have you and eat you up, but I could not bear to do it." Whereupon the mouse answered, "Believe me, madam, you will never repent of your kindness." The queen was immensely astonished when the mouse began to speak, and still more so when she saw its little sharp nose turn to a beautiful face, and its paws to hands and feet. Then it suddenly grew tall, and the queen recognized the fairy who had come with the wicked king to visit her. The fairy smiled at her astonished look, and said, "I wanted to see if you were faithful and capable of feeling a real friendship for me. For you see, we fairies are rich in everything but friends, and those are hard to find. It is not possible that you should want for friends, you charming creature," said the queen, kissing her. "Indeed it is so," the fairy said. "For those who are only friendly with me for their own advantage, I do not count at all. But when you cared for the poor little mouse, you could not have known there was anything to be gained by it, and to try you further, I took the form of the old woman whom you talked to from the window, and then I was convinced that you really loved me." Then, turning to the little princess, she kissed her rosy lips 3 times, saying, "Dear little one, I promise that you shall be richer than your father and shall live 100 years, always pretty and happy, without fear of old age and wrinkles." The queen, quite delighted, thanked the fairy gratefully, and begged her to take charge of the little Delicia and bring her up as her own daughter. This she agreed to do, and then they shut the basket and lowered it carefully, baby and all, to the ground at the foot of the tower. The fairy then changed herself back into the form of a mouse, and this delayed her a few seconds, after which she ran nimbly down the straw rope, but only to find when she got to the bottom that the baby had disappeared. In the greatest terror, she ran up again to the queen, crying, "All is lost! My enemy, Cancaline, has stolen the princess away. You must know that she is a cruel fairy who hates me, and as she is older than I am and has more power, I can do nothing against her. I know no way of rescuing Delicia from her clutches." When the queen heard this terrible news, she was heartbroken, and begged the fairy to do all she could to get the poor little princess back again. At this moment in came the gaoler, and when he missed the little princess, he at once told the king, who came in a great fury asking what the queen had done with her. She answered that a fairy, whose name she did not know, had come and carried her off by force. Upon this the king stamped upon the ground and cried in a terrible voice, "You shall be hung! I always told you you should." And without another word he dragged the unlucky queen out into the nearest wood and climbed up into a tree to look for a branch to which he could hang her. But when he was quite high up, the fairy, who had made herself invisible and followed them, gave him a sudden push, which made him lose his footing and fall to the ground with a crash and break 4 of his teeth. And while he was trying to mend them, The fairy carried the queen off in her flying chariot to a beautiful castle, where she was so kind to her that but for the loss of Delicia, the queen would have been perfectly happy. But though the good little mouse did her very utmost, they could not find out where Canceline had hidden the little princess. Thus 15 years went by, and the queen had somewhat recovered from her grief, when the news reached her that the son of the wicked king wished to marry the little maiden who kept the turkeys, and that she had refused him. The wedding dresses had been made nevertheless, and the festivities were to be so splendid that all the people for leagues round were flocking in to be present at them. The queen felt quite curious about a little turkey maiden who did not wish to be a queen, so the little mouse conveyed herself to the poultry yard to find out what she was like. She found the turkey maiden sitting upon a big stone, barefooted and miserably dressed in an old, coarse linen gown and cap. The ground at her feet was all strewn with robes of gold and silver, ribbons and laces, diamonds and pearls, over which the turkeys were stalking to and fro, while the king's ugly, disagreeable son stood opposite her, declaring angrily that if she would not marry him she should be killed. The turkey maiden answered proudly, "I never will marry you. You are too ugly and too much like your cruel father. Leave me in peace with my turkeys, which I like far better than all your fine gifts." The little mouse watched her with the greatest admiration, for she was as beautiful as the spring, and as soon as the wicked prince was gone, she took the form of an old peasant woman, and said to her, "Good day, my pretty one. You have a fine flock of turkeys there." The young turkey maiden turned her gentle eyes upon the old woman, and answered, "Yet they wish me to leave them to become a miserable queen. What is your advice upon the matter?" "My child," said the fairy, "a crown is a very pretty thing, but you know neither the price nor the weight of it. I know so well that I have refused to wear one," said the little maiden, "though I don't know who was my father or who was my mother, and I have not a friend in the world." "You have goodness and beauty, which are of more value than 10 kingdoms, said the wise fairy. "But tell me, child, how came you here, and how is it you have neither father nor mother, nor friend?" "A fairy called Canceline is the cause of my being here," answered she, "for while I lived with her I got nothing but blows and harsh words, until at last I could bear it no longer, and ran away from her without knowing where I was going. And as I came through a wood, the wicked prince met me, and offered to give me charge of the poultry yard. I accepted gladly, not knowing that I should have to see him day by day. And now he wants to marry me, but that I will never consent to." Upon hearing this, the fairy became convinced that the little turkey maiden was none other than the Princess Delicia. "What is your name?" "My little one," said she. "I am called Delicia, if it please you," she answered. Then the fairy threw her arms round the princess's neck and nearly smothered her with kisses, saying, "Ah, Delicia, I am a very old friend of yours, and I am truly glad to find you at last. But you might look nicer than you do in that old gown, which is only fit for a kitchen maid. Take this pretty dress, and let us see the difference it will make." So Delicia took off the ugly cap, and shook out all her fair shining hair, and bathed her hands and face in clear water from the nearest spring till her cheeks were like roses. And when she was adorned with the diamonds and the splendid robe the fairy had given her, she looked the most beautiful princess in the world. And the fairy with great delight cried, "Now you look as you ought to look. Delicia, what do you think about it yourself?" And Delicia answered, "I feel as if I were the daughter of some great king." "And would you be glad if you were?" said the fairy. "Indeed I should," answered she. "Ah, well," said the fairy, "tomorrow I may have some pleasant news for you." So she hurried back to her castle, where the queen sat busy with her embroidery, and cried, "Well, madam, will you wager your thimble and your golden needle that I am bringing you the best news you could possibly hear?" "Alas," sighed the queen, "since the death of the jolly king and the loss of my Delicia, all the news in the world is not worth a pin to me." "There, there, don't be melancholy," said the fairy. "I assure you the princess is quite well, and I have never seen her equal for beauty. She might be a queen tomorrow if she chose." And then she told all that had happened, and the queen first rejoiced over the thought of Delicia's beauty, and then wept at the idea of her being a turkey maiden. "I will not hear of her being made to marry the wicked king's son," she said. "Let us go at once and bring her here." In the meantime, the wicked prince, who was very angry with Delicia, had sat himself down under a tree and cried and howled with rage and spite until the king heard him and cried out from the window, "What is the matter with you, that you are making all this disturbance?" The prince replied, "It is all because our turkey maiden will not love me." "Won't love you?" "Eh," said the king, "we'll very soon see about that." So he called his guards and told them to go and fetch Delicia. "See if I don't make her change her mind pretty soon," said the wicked king with a chuckle. Then the guards began to search the poultry yard, and could find nobody there but Delicia, who, with her splendid dress and her crown of diamonds, looked such a lovely princess that they hardly dared to speak to her. But she said to them very politely, "Pray tell me what you are looking for here." "Madam," they answered, "we are sent for an insignificant little person called Delicia." "Alas," said she, "that is my name. What can you want with me?" So the guards tied her hands and feet with thick ropes, for fear she might run away, and brought her to the king, who was waiting with his son. When he saw her, he was very much astonished at her beauty, which would have made anyone less hard-hearted sorry for her. But the wicked king only laughed and mocked at her and cried, "Well, little fright, little toad, why don't you love my son, who is far too handsome and too good for you? Make haste and begin to love him this instant, or you shall be tarred and feathered." Then the poor little princess, shaking with terror, went down on her knees, crying, "Oh, don't tar and feather me, please. It would be so uncomfortable. Let me have 2 or 3 days to make up my mind, and then you shall do as you like with me." The wicked prince would have liked very much to see her tarred and feathered, but the king ordered that she should be shut up in a dark dungeon. It was just at this moment that the queen and the fairy arrived in the flying chariot, and the queen was dreadfully distressed at the turn affairs had taken, and said miserably that she was destined to be unfortunate all her days. But the fairy bade her take courage. "I'll pay them out yet," said she, nodding her head with an air of great determination. That very same night, as soon as the wicked king had gone to bed, the fairy changed herself into the little mouse, and creeping up onto his pillow nibbled his ear, so that he squealed out quite loudly and turned over on his other side. But that was no good, for the little mouse only set to work and gnawed away at the second ear until it hurt more than the first one. Then the king cried, "Murder and thieves!" and all his guards ran to see what was the matter, but they could find nothing and nobody, for the little mouse had run off to the prince's room and was serving him in exactly the same way. All night long she ran from one to the other, until at last, driven quite frantic by terror and want of sleep, the king rushed out of the palace crying, "Help! Help! I am pursued by rats." The prince, when he heard this, got up also, and ran after the king, and they had not gone far when they both fell into the river and were never heard of again. Then the good fairy ran to tell the queen, and they went together to the black dungeon where Delicia was imprisoned. The fairy touched each door with her wand, and it sprang open instantly. But they had to go through 40 before they came to the princess, who was sitting on the floor looking very dejected. But when the queen rushed in and kissed her 20 times in a minute, and laughed and cried and told Delicia all her history, the princess was wild with delight. Then the fairy showed her all the wonderful dresses and jewels she had brought for her, and said, "Don't let us waste time. We must go and harangue the people." So she walked first, looking very serious and dignified, and wearing a dress, the train of which was at least 10 ells long. Behind her came the queen, wearing a blue velvet robe embroidered with gold, and a diamond crown that was brighter than the sun itself. Last of all walked Delicia, who was so beautiful that it was nothing short of marvellous. They proceeded through the streets, returning the salutations of all they met, great or small, and all the people turned and followed them, wondering who these noble ladies could be. When the audience hall was quite full, the fairy said to the subjects of the wicked king that if they would accept Delicia, who was the daughter of the jolly king, as their queen, she would undertake to find a suitable husband for her, and would promise that during their reign there should be nothing but rejoicing and merrymaking, and all dismal things should be entirely banished. Upon this the people cried with one accord, "We will, we will. We have been gloomy and miserable too long already." And they all took hands and danced round the queen, and Delicia and the good fairy, singing, "Yes, yes, we will. We will." Then there were feasts and fireworks in every street in the town, and early the next morning the fairy, who had been all over the world in the night, brought back with her, in her flying chariot, the most handsome and good-tempered prince she could find anywhere. He was so charming that Delicia loved him from the moment their eyes met, and as for him, of course, he could not help thinking himself the luckiest prince in the world. The queen felt that she had really come to the end of her misfortunes at last, and they all lived happily ever after. The Marvellous Musician. There was once upon a time a marvellous musician. One day he was wandering through a wood all by himself, thinking now of one thing, now of another, till there was nothing else left to think about. Then he said to himself, "Time hangs very heavily on my hands when I'm all alone in the wood. I must try and find a pleasant companion." So he took his fiddle out and fiddled till he woke the echoes round. After a time, a wolf came through the thicket and trotted up to the musician. "Oh, it's a wolf, is it?" said he. "I've not the smallest wish for his society." But the wolf approached him and said, "Oh, my dear musician, how beautifully you play. I wish you'd teach me how it's done." "That's easily learned," answered the fiddler. "You must only do exactly as I tell you." "Of course I will," replied the wolf. "I can promise that you will find me a most apt pupil." So they joined company and went on their way together, and after a time they came to an old oak tree, which was hollow and had a crack in the middle of the trunk. "Now," said the musician, "if you want to learn to fiddle, here's your chance. Lay your front paws in this crack." The wolf did as he was told, and the musician quickly seized a stone, and wedged both his fore paws so firmly into the crack that he was held there, a fast prisoner. "Wait there till I return," said the fiddler, and he went on his way. After a time he said to himself again, "Time hangs very heavily on my hands when I'm all alone in the wood. I must try and find a companion." So he drew out his fiddle and fiddled away lustily. Presently a fox slunk through the trees. "Aha! What have we here?" said the musician. A fox. "Well, I haven't the smallest desire for his company." The fox came straight up to him and said, "My dear friend, how beautifully you play the fiddle. I would like to learn how you do it." "Nothing easier," said the musician, "if you'll promise to do exactly as I tell you." "Certainly," answered the fox. "You have only to say the word." "Well then, follow me," replied the fiddler. When they had gone a bit of the way, they came to a path with high trees on each side. Here the musician halted, bent a stout hazel bough down to the ground from one side of the path, and put his foot on the end of it to keep it down. Then he bent a branch down from the other side and said, "Give me your left front paw, my little fox, if you really wish to learn how it's done." The fox did as he was told, and the musician tied his front paw to the end of one of the branches. "Now, my friend," he said, "give me your right paw." This he bound to the other branch, and having carefully seen that his knots were all secure, he stepped off the ends of the branches, and they sprang back, leaving the poor fox suspended in mid-air. "Just you wait where you are till I return," said the musician, and he went on his way again. Once more he said to himself, "Time hangs heavily on my hands when I'm all alone in the wood. I must try and find another companion." So he took out his fiddle and played as merrily as before. This time a little hare came running up at the sound. "Oh, here comes a hare," said the musician. "I've not the smallest desire for his company." "How beautifully you play, dear Mr. Fiddler," said the little hare. "I wish I could learn how you do it." "It's easily learnt," answered the musician. "Just do exactly as I tell you." "That I will," said the hare. "You will find me a most attentive pupil." They went on a bit together till they came to a thin part of the wood where they found an aspen tree growing. The musician bound a long cord round the little hare's neck, the other end of which he fastened to the tree. "Now, my merry little friend," said the musician, "run 20 times round the tree." The little hare obeyed, and when it had run 20 times round the tree, the cord had twisted itself 20 times round the trunk, so that the poor little beast was held a fast prisoner, and it might bite and tear as much as it liked, it couldn't free itself, and the cord only cut its tender neck. "Wait there till I return," said the musician, and went on his way. In the meantime, the wolf had pulled and bitten and scratched at the stone, till at last he succeeded in getting his paws out. Full of anger, he hurried after the musician, determined when he met him to tear him to pieces. When the fox saw him running by, he called out as loud as he could, "Brother Wolf, come to my rescue! The musician has deceived me too." The wolf pulled the branches down, bit the cord in two, and set the fox free. So they went on their way together, both vowing vengeance on the musician. They found the poor imprisoned little hare, and having set him free also, they all set out to look for their enemy. During this time, the musician had once more played his fiddle, and had been more fortunate in the result. The sounds pierced to the ears of a poor woodman, who instantly left his work, and with his hatchet under his arm came to listen to the music. "At last I've got a proper sort of companion," said the musician, "for it was a human being I wanted all along, and not a wild animal." And he began playing so enchantingly that the poor man stood there as if bewitched, and his heart leapt for joy as he listened. And as he stood thus, the wolf and fox and little hare came up, and the woodman saw at once that they meant mischief. He lifted his glittering axe and placed himself in front of the musician, as much as to say, "If you touch a hair of his head, beware, for you will have to answer for it to me." Then the beasts were frightened, and they all three ran back into the wood, and the musician played the woodman one of his best tunes by way of thanks, and then continued his way. The Master Thief. There was once upon a time a husbandman who had 3 sons. He had no property to bequeath to them, and no means of putting them in the way of getting a living, and did not know what to do. So he said that they had his leave to take to anything they most fancied, and go to any place they best liked. He would gladly accompany them for some part of their way, he said, and that he did. He went with them till they came to a place where 3 roads met, and there each of them took his own way. And the father bade them farewell, and returned to his own home again. What became of the 2 elder? I have never been able to discover, but the youngest went both far and wide. It came to pass one night, as he was going through a great wood, that a terrible storm came on. It blew so hard and rained so heavily that he could scarcely keep his eyes open, and before he was aware of it, he had got quite out of the track and could neither find road nor path. But he went on, and at last he saw a light far away in the wood. Then he thought he must try and get to it, and after a long, long time he did reach it. There was a large house, and the fire was burning so brightly inside that he could tell that the people were not in bed. So he went in, and inside there was an old woman who was busy about some work. "Good evening, mother," said the youth. "Good evening," said the old woman. "Utetu, it is terrible weather outside tonight," said the young fellow. "Indeed it is," said the old woman. "Can I sleep here and have shelter for the night?" asked the youth. "It wouldn't be good for you to sleep here," said the old hag, "for if the people of the house come home and find you, they will kill both you and me." "What kind of people are they then who dwell here?" said the youth. "Oh, robbers and rabble of that sort," said the old woman. "They stole me away when I was little, and I have had to keep house for them ever since. I still think I will go to bed." "All the same," said the youth, "no matter what happens, I'll not go out tonight in such weather as this." "Well then, it will be the worse for yourself," said the old woman. The young man lay down in a bed which stood near, but he dared not go to sleep, and it was better that he didn't, for the robbers came, and the old woman said that a young fellow who was a stranger had come there, and she had not been able to get him to go away again. "Did you see if he had any money?" said the robbers. "He's not one to have money, he is a tramp. If he has a few clothes to his back, that is all." Then the robbers began to mutter to each other apart about what they should do with him, whether they should murder him or what else they should do. In the meantime, the boy got up and began to talk to them, and asked them if they did not want a manservant, for he could find pleasure enough in serving them. "Yes," said they, "if you have a mind to take to the trade that we follow, you may have a place here." "It's all the same to me what trade I follow," said the youth, "for when I came away from home my father gave me leave to take to any trade I fancied." "Have you a fancy for stealing then?" said the robbers. "Yes," said the boy, for he thought that was a trade which would not take long to learn. Not very far off there dwelt a man who had 3 oxen, one of which he was to take to the town to sell. The robbers had heard of this, so they told the youth that if he were able to steal the ox from him on the way, without his knowing, and without doing him any harm, he should have leave to be their servant man. So the youth set off, taking with him a pretty shoe with a silver buckle that was lying about in the house. He put this in the road by which the man must go with his ox, and then went into the wood and hid himself under a bush. When the man came up, he at once saw the shoe. "That's a brave shoe," said he. "If I had but the fellow to it, I would carry it home with me, and then I should put my old woman into a good humour for once." For he had a wife who was so cross and ill-tempered that the time between the beatings she gave him was very short. But then he bethought himself that he could do nothing with one shoe if he had not the fellow to it. So he journeyed onwards and let it lie where it was. Then the youth picked up the shoe and hurried off away through the wood as fast as he was able, to get in front of the man, and then put the shoe in the road before him again. When the man came with the ox and saw the shoe, he was quite vexed at having been so stupid as to leave the fellow to it, lying where it was, instead of bringing it on with him. "I will just run back again and fetch it now," he said to himself. "And then I shall take back a pair of good shoes to the old woman, and she may perhaps throw a kind word to me for once." So he went and searched for the other shoe for a long, long time. But no shoe was to be found, and at last he was forced to go back with the one which he had. In the meantime, the youth had taken the ox and gone off with it. When the man got there and found that his ox was gone, he began to weep and wail, for he was afraid that when his old woman got to know, she would be the death of him. But all at once it came into his head to go home and get the other ox and drive it to the town, and take good care that his old wife knew nothing about it. So he did this. He went home and took the ox without his wife's knowing about it, and went on his way to the town with it. But the robbers, they knew it well, because they got out their magic. So they told the youth that if he could take this ox also, without the man knowing anything about it, and without doing him any hurt, he should then be on an equality with them. "Well, that will not be a very hard thing to do," thought the youth. This time he took with him a rope and put it under his arms and tied himself up to a tree, which hung over the road that the man would have to take. So the man came with his ox, and when he saw the body hanging there, he felt a little queer. "What a hard lot yours must have been to make you hang yourself," said he. "Ah, well, you may hang there for me. I can't breathe life into you again." So on he went with his ox. Then the youth sprang down from the tree, ran by a short-cut and got before him, and once more hung himself up on a tree in the road before the man. "How I should like to know if you really were so sick at heart that you hanged yourself there, or if it is only a hobgoblin that's before me," said the man. "Ah, well, you may hang there for me, whether you are a hobgoblin or not," and on he went with his ox. Once more the youth did just as he had done twice already, jumped down from the tree, ran by a short-cut through the wood, and again hanged himself in the very middle of the road before him. But when the man once more saw this, he said to himself, "What a bad business this is! Can they all have been so heavy-hearted that they have all three hanged themselves? No, I can't believe that it is anything but witchcraft. But I will know the truth," he said. "If the two others are still hanging there, it is true. But if they are not, it's nothing else but witchcraft." So he tied up his ox and ran back to see if they really were hanging there. While he was going and looking up at every tree as he went, the youth leapt down and took his ox and went off with it. Anyone may easily imagine what a fury the man fell into when he came back and saw that his ox was gone. He wept and he raged, but at last he took comfort and told himself that the best thing to do was to go home and take the third ox, without letting his wife know anything about it, and then try to sell it so well that he got a good sum of money for it. So he went home and took the third ox, and drove it off without his wife knowing anything about it. But the robbers knew all about it, and they told the youth that if he could steal this as he had stolen the two others, he should be master of the whole troop. So the youth set out and went to the wood, and when the man was coming along with the ox, he began to bellow loudly, just like a great ox somewhere inside the wood. When the man heard that, he was right glad, for he fancied he recognized the voice of his big bullock, and thought that now he should find both of them again. So he tied up the third and ran away off the road to look for them in the wood. In the meantime, the youth went away with the third ox. When the man returned and found that he had lost that too, he fell into such a rage that there was no bounds to it. He wept and lamented, and for many days he did not dare to go home again, for he was afraid that the old woman would slay him outright. The robbers, also, were not very well pleased at this, for they were forced to own that the youth was at the head of them all. So one day they made up their minds to set to work to do something which it was not in his power to accomplish, and they all took to the road together, and left him at home alone. When they were well out of the house, the first thing that he did was to drive the oxen out on the road, whereupon they all ran home again to the man from whom he had stolen them, and right glad was the husbandman to see them. Then he brought out all the horses the robbers had, and loaded them with the most valuable things which he could find, vessels of gold and of silver, and clothes and other magnificent things. And then he told the old woman to greet the robbers from him, and thank them from him, and say that he had gone away, and that they would have a great deal of difficulty in finding him again. And with that he drove the horses out of the courtyard. After a long time he came to the road on which he was travelling, when he came to the robbers. And when he had got very near home, and was in sight of the house where his father lived, he put on a uniform which he had found among the things he had taken from the robbers, and which was made just like a general's, and drove into the yard just as if he were a great man. Then he entered the house and asked if he could find a lodging there. "No, indeed you can't," said his father. "How could I possibly be able to lodge such a great gentleman as you? It is all that I can do to find clothes and bedding for myself, and wretched they are." "You were always a hard man," said the youth, "and hard you are still if you refuse to let your own son come into your house." "Are you my son?" said the man. "Do you not know me again, then?" said the youth. Then he recognized him and said, "But what trade have you taken to that has made you such a great man in so short a time?" "Oh, that I will tell you," answered the youth. "You said that I might take to anything I liked, so I apprenticed myself to some thieves and robbers. And now I have served my time and have become master thief." Now the governor of the province lived by his father's cottage, and this governor had such a large house and so much money that he did not even know how much it was. And he had a daughter too, who was both pretty and dainty and good and wise. So the master thief was determined to have her to wife, and told his father that he was to go to the governor and ask for his daughter for him. "If he asks what trade I follow, you may say that I am a master thief," said he. "I think you must be crazy," said the man, "for you can't be in your senses if you think of anything so foolish. You must go to the governor and beg for his daughter." "There is no help," said the youth, "but I dare not go to the governor and say this. He is so rich and has so much wealth of all kinds," said the man. "There is no help for it," said the master thief. "Go you must, whether you like it or not. If I can't get you to go by using good words, I will soon make you go with bad ones." But the man was still unwilling, so the master thief followed him, threatening him with a great birch stick, till he went weeping and wailing through the door to the governor of the province. "Now, my man, and what's amiss with you?" said the governor. So he told him that he had 3 sons who had gone away one day, and how he had given them permission to go where they chose, and take to whatsoever work they fancied. "Now," he said, "the youngest of them has come home, and has threatened me till I have come to you to ask for your daughter for him. And I am to say that he is a master thief." And again the man fell a weeping and lamenting. "Console yourself, my man," said the governor, laughing. You may tell him from me that he must first give me some proof of this. If he can steal the joint off the spit in the kitchen on Sunday, when every one of us is watching it, he shall have my daughter. Will you tell him that?" The man did tell him, and the youth thought it would be easy enough to do it. So he set himself to work to catch 3 hares alive, put them in a bag, clad himself in some old rags, so that he looked so poor and wretched that it was quite pitiable to see him. And in this guise on Sunday forenoon he sneaked into the passage with his bag like any beggar boy. The governor himself and everyone in the house was in the kitchen, keeping watch over the joint. While they were doing this, the youth let one of the hares slip out of his bag, and off it set, and began to run round the yard. "Just look at that hare," said the people in the kitchen, and wanted to go out and catch it. The governor saw it too, but said, "Oh, let it go. It's no use to think of catching a hare when it's running away." It was not long before the youth let another hare out, and the people in the kitchen saw this too, and thought that it was the same. So again they wanted to go out and catch it, but the governor again told them that it was of no use to try. Very soon afterwards, however, the youth let slip the 3rd hare, and it set off and ran round and round the courtyard. The people in the kitchen saw this too, and believed that it was still the same hare that was running about, so they wanted to go out and catch it. "It's a remarkably fine hare," said the governor. "Come and let us see if we can get hold of it." So out he went, and the others with him, and away went the hare, and they after it, in real earnest. In the meantime, however, the master thief took the joint and ran off with it, and whether the governor got any roast meat for his dinner that day, I know not. But I know that he had no roast hare, though he chased it till he was both hot and tired. At noon came the priest, and when the governor had told him of the trick played by the master thief, there was no end to the ridicule he cast on the governor. "For my part," said the priest, "I can't imagine myself being made a fool of by such a fellow as that." "Well, I advise you to be careful," said the governor, "for he may be with you before you are at all aware." But the priest repeated what he had said, and mocked the governor for having allowed himself to be made such a fool of. Later in the afternoon, the master thief came and wanted to have the governor's daughter as he had promised. "You must first give some more samples of your skill," said the governor, trying to speak him fair, "for what you did today was no such very great thing after all. Couldn't you play off a really good trick on the priest? For he is sitting inside there and calling me a fool for having let myself be taken in by such a fellow as you." "Well, it wouldn't be very hard to do that," said the master thief. So he dressed himself up like a bird, and threw a great white sheet over himself, broke off a goose's wings, and set them on his back, and in this attire climbed into a great maple tree which stood in the priest's garden. So when the priest returned home in the evening, the youth began to cry, "Father Lawrence! Father Lawrence!" For the priest was called Father Lawrence. "Who is calling me?" said the priest. "I am an angel sent to announce to thee that because of thy piety thou shalt be taken away alive into heaven," said the master thief. "Wilt thou hold thyself in readiness to travel away next Monday night? For then will I come and fetch thee, and bear thee away with me in a sack, and thou must lay all thy gold and silver, and whatsoever thou mayest possess of this world's wealth, in a heap in thy best parlour." So Father Lawrence fell down on his knees before the angel and thanked him, and the following Sunday he preached a farewell sermon, and gave out that an angel had come down into the large maple tree in his garden, and had announced to him that, because of his righteousness, he should be taken up alive into heaven, and as he thus preached and told them this, Everyone in the church, old or young, wept. On Monday night, the master thief once more came as an angel, and before the priest was put into the sack, he fell on his knees and thanked him. But no sooner was the priest safely inside it than the master thief began to drag him away over stocks and stones. "Oh! Oh!" cried the priest in the sack. "Where are you taking me? This is the way to heaven." "The way to heaven is not an easy one," said the master thief, and dragged him along till he all but killed him. At last he flung him into the governor's goose house, and the geese began to hiss and peck at him, till he felt more dead than alive. "Oh, oh, oh, oh! Where am I now?" asked the priest. "Now you are in purgatory," said the master thief. And off he went, and took the gold and the silver and all the precious things which the priest had laid together in his best parlour. Next morning, when the goose girl came to let out the geese, she heard the priest bemoaning himself as he lay in the sack in the goose house. "Oh, heavens! Who is that? And what ails you?" said she. "Oh," said the priest, "if you are an angel from heaven, do let me out and let me go back to earth again. For no place was ever so bad as this. The little fiends nip me so with their tongues." "I am no angel," said the girl, and helped the priest out of the sack. "I only look after the governor's geese. That's what I do, and they are the little fiends which have pinched your reverence. This is the master thief's doing." "Oh, my gold and my silver and my best clothes!" shrieked the priest, and, wild with rage, he ran home so fast that the goose girl thought he had suddenly gone mad. When the governor learned what had happened to the priest, he laughed till he nearly killed himself. But when the master thief came and wanted to have his daughter according to promise, he once more gave him nothing but fine words, and said, "You must give me one more proof of your skill, so that I can really judge of your worth. I have 12 horses in my stable, and I will put 12 stable boys in it, one on each horse. If you are clever enough to steal the horses from under them, I will see what I can do for you." "What you set me to do can be done," said the master thief. "But am I certain to get your daughter when it is?" "Yes, if you can do that, I will do my best for you," said the governor. So the master thief went to a shop and bought enough brandy to fill 2 pocket flasks, and he put a sleeping drink into one of these, but into the other he poured brandy only. Then he engaged 11 men to lie that night in hiding behind the governor's stable. After this, by fair words and good payment, he borrowed a ragged gown and a jerkin from an aged woman, and then, with a staff in his hand and a poke on his back, he hobbled off as evening came on towards the governor's stable. The stable boys were just watering the horses for the night, and it was quite as much as they could do to attend to that. "What on earth do you want here?" said one of them to the old woman. "Oh dear, how cold it is," she said, sobbing and shivering with cold. Oh dear, it's cold enough to freeze a poor old body to death." And she shivered and shook again and said, "For heaven's sake, give me leave to stay here and sit just inside the stable door." "You will get nothing of the kind. Be off this moment. If the governor were to catch sight of you here, he would lead us a pretty dance," said one. "Oh, what a poor helpless old creature," said another, who felt sorry for her. "That poor old woman can do no harm to anyone. She may sit there and welcome." The rest of them thought that she ought not to stay. But while they were disputing about this and looking after the horses, she crept farther and farther into the stable, and at last sat down behind the door. And when once she was inside, no one took any more notice of her. As the night wore on, the stable boys found it rather cold work to sit still on horseback. "Hutetu, but it is fearfully cold," said one, and began to beat his arms backwards and forwards across his breast. "Yes, I am so cold that my teeth are chattering," said another. "If one had but a little tobacco," said a third. Well, one of them had a little, so they shared it among them, though there was very little for each man, but they chewed it. This was some help to them, but very soon they were just as cold as before. "Hutetu," said one of them, shivering again. "Hutetu," said the old woman, gnashing her teeth together till they chattered inside her mouth, and then she got out the flask which contained nothing but brandy, and her hands trembled so that she shook the bottle about, and when she drank it, made a great gulp in her throat. "What is that you have in your flask, old woman?" asked one of the stable boys. "Oh, it's only a little drop of brandy, your honour," she said. "Brandy? What? Let me have a drop." "Let me have a drop!" screamed all the 12 at once. "Oh, but what I have is so little," whimpered the old woman. "It will not even wet your mouths." But they were determined to have it, and there was nothing to be done but give it. So she took out the flask with the sleeping drink and put it to the lips of the first of them. And now she shook no more, but guided the flask so that each of them got just as much as he ought. And the 12th had not done drinking before the first was already sitting snoring. Then the master thief flung off his beggar's rags and took one stable boy after the other, and gently set him astride on the partitions which divided the stalls. And then he called his 11 men who were waiting outside, and they rode off with the governor's horses. In the morning, when the governor came to look after his stable boys, they were just beginning to come to again. They were driving their spurs into the partition till the splinters flew about, and some of the boys fell off, and some still hung on and sat looking like fools. "Well," said the governor, "it is easy to see who has been here. But what a worthless set of fellows you must be to sit here and let the master thief steal the horses from under you." And they all got a beating for not having kept watch better. Later in the day, the master thief came and related what he had done, and wanted to have the governor's daughter as had been promised. But the governor gave him $100, and said that he must do something that was better still. "Do you think you can steal my horse from under me when I am out riding on it?" said he. "Well, it might be done," said the master thief, "if I were absolutely certain that I should get your daughter." So the governor said that he would see what he could do, and then he said that on a certain day he would ride out to a great common, where they drilled the soldiers. So the master thief immediately got hold of an old worn-out mare, and set himself to work to make a collar for it of green withes and branches of broom, bought a shabby old cart and a great cask, and then he told a poor old beggar woman that he would give her $10 if she would get into the cask and keep her mouth wide open beneath the tap-hole, into which he was going to stick his finger. No harm should happen to her, he said. She should only be driven about a little, and if he took his finger out more than once, she should have $10 more. Then he dressed himself in rags, dyed himself with soot, and put on a wig and a great beard of goat's hair, so that it was impossible to recognize him, and went to the parade ground, where the governor had already been riding about a long time. When the master thief got there, the mare went along so slowly and quietly that the cart hardly seemed to move from the spot. The mare pulled it a little forward, and then a little back, and then it stopped quite short. Then the mare pulled a little forward again, and it moved with such difficulty that the governor had not the least idea that this was the master thief. He rode straight up to him, and asked if he had seen anyone hiding anywhere about in a wood that was close by. "No," said the man, "that have I not." "Hark you," said the governor, "if you will ride into that wood, and search it carefully to see if you can light upon a fellow who is hiding in there, you shall have the loan of my horse, and a good present of money for your trouble." "I am not sure that I can do it," said the man. for I have to go to a wedding with this cask of mead, which I have been to fetch, and the tap has fallen out on the way. So now I have to keep my finger in the tap-hole as I drive." "Oh, just ride off," said the governor, "and I will look after the cask, and the horse too." So the man said that if he would do that, he would go, but he begged the governor to be very careful to put his finger into the tap-hole the moment he took his out. So the governor said that he would do his very best, and the master thief got on the governor's horse. But time passed, and it grew later and later, and still the man did not come back. And at last the governor grew so weary of keeping his finger in the tap-hole that he took it out. "Now I shall have $10 more," cried the old woman inside the cask. So he soon saw what kind of mead it was, and set out homewards. When he had gone a very little way, he met his servant bringing him the horse, for the master thief had already taken it home. The following day he went to the governor, and wanted to have his daughter according to promise. But the governor again put him off with fine words, and only gave him $300, saying that he must do one more masterpiece of skill, and if he were but able to do that, he should have her. Well, the master thief thought he might if he could hear what it was. "Do you think you can steal the sheet off our bed and my wife's nightgown?" said the governor. "That is by no means impossible," said the master thief. "I only wish I could get your daughter as easily." So late at night, the master thief went and cut down a thief who was hanging on the gallows, laid him on his own shoulders, and took him away with him. Then he got hold of a long ladder, set it up against the governor's bedroom window, and climbed up and moved the dead man's head up and down, just as if he were someone who was standing outside and peeping in. "There's the master thief." "Mother," said the governor, nudging his wife, "now I'll just shoot him, that I will." So he took up a rifle which he had laid at his bedside. "Oh, no, you must not do that," said his wife. "You yourself arranged that he was to come here." "Yes, mother, I will shoot him," said he, and lay there aiming, and then aiming again. For no sooner was the head up and he caught sight of it, than it was gone again. At last he got a chance and fired, and the dead body fell with a loud thud to the ground, and down went the master thief too, as fast as he could. "Well," said the governor, "I certainly am the chief man about here, but people soon begin to talk, and it would be very unpleasant if they were to see this dead body. The best thing that I can do is to go out and bury him." "Just do what you think best, father," said his wife. So the governor got up and went downstairs, and as soon as he had gone out through the door, the master thief stole in and went straight upstairs to the woman. "Well, father dear," said she, for she thought it was her husband, "have you got done already?" "Oh, yes, I only put him into a hole," said he, "and raked a little earth over him. That's all I have been able to do tonight, for it is fearful weather outside. I will bury him better afterwards, but just let me have the sheet to wipe myself with, for he was bleeding, and I have got covered with blood with carrying him." So she gave him the sheet. "You will have to let me have your nightgown too," he said, "for I begin to see that the sheet won't be enough." Then she gave him her nightgown, but just then it came into his head that he had forgotten to lock the door, and he was forced to go downstairs and do it before he could lie down in bed again. So off he went with the sheet, and the nightgown too. An hour later, the real governor returned. "Well, what a time it has taken to lock the house door, father," said his wife. "And what have you done with the sheet and the nightgown?" "What do you mean?" asked the governor. "Oh, I am asking you what you have done with the nightgown and sheet that you got to wipe the blood off yourself with," said she. "Good heavens," said the governor, "has he actually got the better of me again?" When day came, the master thief came too, and wanted to have the governor's daughter as had been promised, and the governor dared do no otherwise than give her to him, and much money besides, for he feared that if he did not, the master thief might steal the very eyes out of his head, and that he himself would be ill spoken of by all men. The master thief lived well and happily from that time forth, and whether he ever stole any more or not, I cannot tell you, but if he did, it was but for pastime,